This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, I have another interview, Actors on Acting. I am speaking with Basil Hoffman. The name may not be familiar to you, but the face surely is if you've watched any television or film in the last 40 plus years. The conversation will begin in a moment. As mentioned, I am speaking with actor Basil Hoffman. He is what is generously known, or ignominiously known sometimes in the business, as a character actor. But I want to ask Basil to start off by giving a little bit of background about himself. He spent decades in Hollywood, in film and television. So if you could say a little bit about where you came from, how you got into acting, and anything else about yourself of note.
Sure, Dan. I'm from Houston, Texas. My family's a regular middle-class family. My dad was an antique jewelry dealer. I applied to colleges because I was just going to get a college degree. I had no special goal in mind. I think like a lot of kids who go to college. I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Rice. Those were my first three choices. Harvard had no problem rejecting me. Yale had a little problem rejecting me. There were a lot of phone calls between Yale and me, and finally they rejected me. I was on the waiting list at Rice, and finally Rice rejected me. My fourth choice was Tulane University in New Orleans. Business major, economics. Two girls I knew in the university center, we were sitting there having coffee. They asked me if I was going to try out for the campus musical. And I said, no, why would I do that? And they said, well, Basil, it's social. It's a great way to meet girls. So I tried out for the play, and I got a part. And from then on, because of that seemingly happenstance event, my life was changed forever. I was going to be an actor from then on. I did that show. I did a couple more plays. Then I was asked to join Tulane University Theater, which I did. These two girls, by the way, Dwayne Raffi and Paula Ross, subsequently got married to friends of mine, and the two girls and I are still friends to this day. I met a fellow in Tulane named Mike Parver, who directed me in 2 or 3 plays. I had a terrific time in theater. I practically divorced myself from the business school, although I did get my degree in economics. I met another girl at Tulane named Jackie Marks. And Jackie knew a fellow named Edward Schwind. Edward was a regional auditioner for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. I made an appointment with him, I auditioned, and I was accepted to the American Academy, so I went to New York. I had to get a part-time job. I was staying with my uncle for a while, my aunt and uncle in New Jersey, while Michael Parver, who I had worked with at Tulane, was looking for an apartment for us because he was going to be a great director and I was going to be a great actor. And while he was looking for the apartment for us, I was trying to find a job to work my way through acting school. My uncle was going to drive to New York to see his attorney. And he said, why don't I take you into town and then you can look for your work? So I went to his building with him and we were going to say goodbye, and he went up to see his attorney. And I see on the wall a little sign, a brass plate that said Francis I. DuPont and Company Stockbrokers. So I thought, well, maybe they have a job. Maybe there's something that I can do with this brokerage house. So I went up and I told them, introduced myself, told them what I could do. I needed a part-time job. And the manager of the office says to me, there's nothing here for you. He said, but let me call Morris Goldstein, who's the partner in charge of research on Wall Street. So I got to see Morris Goldstein, and Morris Goldstein hired me. And I had a part-time job that sustained me for years. And it started out 6 at night till 2 in the morning as a statistical assistant for $1.50 an hour. In the meantime, Mike Parver found an apartment for us for $100, a walk-up on 95th Street in New York, so we were each paying $50 a month for this apartment. And I went to the American Academy. I was there for 2 years. I had a scholarship for the second year, the final year. And then I went out and proceeded to not know what the hell I was doing, looking for work. to tell me to do that. And this, I think, Dan, is a problem with acting schools in general, and maybe other professional schools as well. Most of the people who teach don't have experience in the profession. So they can tell you pretty much what they know about the technical aspects of a craft, but they can't tell you how to monetize it. They can't tell you how to make a living at it. So it was very hard, but I did what other actors do who don't know what to do. I started looking for agents, sending out pictures and resumes. I would buy backstage and show business every week, and they had auditions for non-equity actors. And I was doing that for a while. I did several plays that were very important, as it turned out. I did a play called An Unpublished Story, which was an off-Broadway play. And it was just a job for me at the time. I think they paid me nothing, or maybe $10 for a performance, but virtually nothing. Later on, it turned out to be extremely important to me. I was dating a girl named Patricia Frawley, and Patricia was also dating a guy named Bill Howe. And Bill Howe knew a couple named Jack and Anna Brown in Pennsylvania who were going to start a summer stock company, an equity company. And through that connection, I got an audition. I got an acting job for the summer at an equity company. I got my equity card. Subsequently, I got my SAG card and my AFTRA card. I did a couple of small parts in TV. One part was on The Defenders, a show that a lot of people might remember from, I guess, from the 60s, pretty much. And still, I went to summer stock every year. I still had to have my part-time job on Wall Street to make a living. And it looked to me like I was on the track to become a career failed actor. And I envisioned myself being 75 years old, driving a cab in New York, telling people I wanted to be an actor. And it scared the hell out of me. So I thought, if I can't make money at this, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to be on Wall Street. I don't want to do anything else. I had new pictures taken. I said, I'm going to get commercials. And I started calling advertising agencies. In those days, every ad agency in New York had its own casting department. And I called all the casting directors and made appointments if I could. And I called the agents. And most of the agents in New York in the 1960s would handle actors freelance for commercials and for other things. And I started getting meetings with agents. And most of the agents I saw said, well, leave a couple of pictures and we'll see what we can do. And I met an agent named Beth Allen at the Michael Harding Agency. And she said, yeah, Basil, she said, I think you're going to do commercials. She said, can you leave me some pictures? And I started to open my briefcase to hand her pictures. She said, no. I want 75 pictures. So I had more pictures made. I gave her 75 pictures. And I got my first commercial through Beth Allen. And it was for Barney's Wash and Wear Suits in New York. Subsequently, I did hundreds of commercials in New York. But the year 1967, the first year I did commercials, it was so important to me, I can still remember the first 5. I did that commercial for Barney's Wash and Wear Suits. I did a commercial for Menon Aftershave. I did one for Whirlpool Dryers. I did one for Dutch Master Cigars. And I did one for Palmolive Soap. And it changed my life forever. In the few months that the commercials I did in New York started to run, in those first few months, I had already made more money than I had made in my first 5 years as an actor. And because of that experience doing the commercials and learning how to make the phone calls and learning how to present myself, monetarily my life changed. I started to feel better about myself. Agents would call me for plays. I got a part in a movie. My first picture, the only movie I ever did in New York, was a picture called Lady Liberty, starring Sophia Loren, being directed by a very great Italian writer-director named Mario Monicelli. And the one scene that I had in the picture was a scene with Sophia Loren. And I had some wonderful experiences on that film. It was a one-day shoot, a long shoot. We shot at night at Kennedy Airport in New York. And I remember a couple of experiences that are very important to me. One is because it was funny, that Monticelli, for some reason, wouldn't speak to the actors in English on the set. Maybe he would speak to the other actors, but I never heard him speak English. And until we got to looping weeks later, I didn't know that he could speak elegant English, but he could, and he did. But on the set, not. And he would speak to his assistant director, Carlo, a fellow named Carlo Vanzina, who has since become a very prolific writer-director in Italy. But anyway, it was little Carlo Vanzina, the assistant director. And at one point, Carlo was having this conversation with Mario, and Mario was gesturing toward me, and Carlo was looking at me. And I was sitting on the set minding my own business, and they were looking at me and gesturing at me. And finally, we took a little break. We took a little meal break for a while, and I ran after Carlo. I said, Carlo, what's going on? What does Mario want from me? And Carlo looks at me like this, and he says, Mr. Monticelli likes your face. And that was the conversation about me from Monticelli. I was a nervous wreck, by the way, working with Sophia Loren. She'd already won an Academy Award. She was unbelievably gorgeous. You can imagine 1971 how pretty she was. We were setting up lights, I guess, for a shot with me. She was sitting, I would say maybe 10 feet away from me, looking at me, smiling. And I was a nervous wreck. I'm sure my nervous energy had my acting off the charts. And she smiled and she said to me very sweetly, do less. And it was the most wonderful acting note I've ever gotten in my life. So simple. She said, do less. It was just a great experience. So that was the only film I ever did in New York.
Well, Basil, before we go on, I want to
Sure.
get back to some of your early biography rather than just go straight through. I want to just talk a little bit about your childhood and growing up, because you said you were born in Houston, and were you from an artistic family? Did anyone paint? I know I live in the Austin area in Texas, and I know Texas is filled with small towns around the big towns where every weekend, there's a fair in one of these towns. You can go buy paintings or craft works or whatnot. Was anyone in your either nuclear or extended family artistic in any way?
Not very much. One of my aunts, my Aunt Ethel, had some talent for drawing a little bit. And I think I had some talent for drawing. And I remember one summer, my parents sent me to the Museum of Fine Art in Houston to take a class. But I never followed through on it. It wasn't something that I think I was fairly good, but I don't think I was ever going to be really good. I wasn't extremely talented as an artist. And it's nothing that I pursued to this day or ever thought about. It's not in me to do that. But as a child, I was able to draw faces a little bit and do a little bit of that. But I never followed through on it. And nobody else in my family was artistic. My parents weren't musical. We went to lots of movies. We went to plays once in a while. But I had no thought about acting or the arts. I never saw myself in it, or at least not consciously, until that event in college when I was enticed to try out for a play.
How about siblings? Did you have any siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
When we spoke a couple of weeks ago, when I first contacted you, you had mentioned religion in your life. Were you raised religious? And Hoffman, is that Jewish Hoffman or is that German Hoffman? Were you raised a Lutheran or a Jew? Or how did that affect your early childhood?
Well, Jewish, but we were Reformed Jews, so you can imagine being a Reformed Jew in Texas. You can imagine how Jewish that is. So we were Jewish, but that meant that I was bar mitzvahed, I was confirmed. We went to temple on the high holidays. We would go to a service on Saturday or Friday night if I had a friend who was being bar mitzvahed. But other than that, no religion. We never prayed. I didn't know very much except what I learned in Sunday school, which was a good bit, Old Testament, of course.
The reason I asked
But
the reason I asked Basil is because I know you had just mentioned earlier about not knowing if you didn't make it as an actor what you would do. I'm wondering what the role of faith or religion has in that, because for me, I'm not religious, but art is sort of that is the thing that makes me look upward in life. And I'm wondering, does art fulfill that role for you, or does religion, or did you, when we spoke, you spoke about religion, are you still Jewish or Reformed Jewish, or did you go conservative, or did you switch to another religion? How does art and religion interplay in your
well,
life?
I will tell you my journey a little bit,
Yeah,
my
go ahead.
religious journey. By the time I got out of college, I was a full-blown atheist. Not a militant atheist, but a total atheist. And I had been an atheist for all of my life until the early 1990s. And sometime, I think around my senior year in college, I started to develop a tightness in my right hand, a stiffness. And over the years, it got a little bit worse from time to time. And I first attributed it to my working out with weights. And especially after a weightlifting session, my hand would feel tight. But later on, it also developed into a tremor. And this was something that my mother had. And it's called a familial tremor. It has nothing to do with Parkinson's, but sometimes you see it sometimes you see it in a much older person, and you see a hand that shakes like this,
Yeah.
And it grows worse over time. My mother had it. Two of her sisters had it. Her father had it very badly, and I was starting to get that. And my wife, I was married in 1988, and my wife, Christine, who has since passed away 10 years ago, but my wife at that time was a student of Christian Science. And I thought it was goofy. She knew I was an atheist, and I didn't believe any of that stuff. I had gone to an orthopedic surgeon. I'd gone to a number of doctors to see what there was that could be done for this shaking hand. It's not a good thing for an actor to have. I was able to hide it. When I was doing something, I'd have my hand in my pocket, or I'd grip the end of a table or the edge of a chair, and nobody knew. But one night, we were coming home from some event, and my hand was shaking so badly that I couldn't get the key into the lock of the front door. And my wife said, "You have to go to a Christian Science practitioner. You must do this." So I did it. And I had no illusions that it would help me, except that it would get my wife off my back about religion. So I went to see this practitioner who I had met through my wife, so I knew her. But I thought she was nuts. I really thought she was crazy. And I thought I'd gone into the twilight zone when I went into her house. It was so goofy. So she talked to me for about 20 minutes, and after this little conversation, none of which made any sense to me at all, none, she hands me a piece of paper, a pad, and a pen, and she said, "I want you to write something for me with your right hand." Now, I've been ambidextrous all my life. I'm mixed-handed, so writing left-handed was natural for me anyway. So when this tremor started, I started to just be totally left-handed. And as a child, I'd also broken my arm twice, my right arm. So I had experience writing left-handed. It wasn't an issue for me. But to write right-handed was impossible. I couldn't do it. The hand would shake, the hand would cramp. It couldn't be done. So she hands me a pad, a yellow pad, I guess it was, a writing pad, and a pen. And she says, "I want you to write something with your right hand." And I took the pen, and I started to write with my right hand. Probably for the first time in 40 years, 35 or 40 years, with no cramp. My hand didn't shake. It was over. I was healed against my will. I had no illusions that I thought it was nuts. So I said, her name was Polite. I said, "Polite, what happened?" She said, "Well, you were healed." I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "But why? How?" She said, "You really want to know?" I said, "Yeah, I do want to know." I was an atheist, but I wasn't an idiot. So she said, "There are two books that I want you to read." She said, "I want you to buy a book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. And I want want you to buy a copy of the King James Version of the Bible, and you have to read them. And from that point on, not only was my hand healed, but I was also healed of atheism. And from that time on, I've had many healings. But what has happened, Dan, because you asked if I could relate that to my art or to acting, I now have been able to look back at all the years I was an atheist and things happened that I just thought were chance. And I don't think they were chance. I really believe that God directed me into this. And I will begin with my rejections from Harvard, Yale, and Rice. If I had gone to Harvard or Yale or Rice, I wouldn't have met those two girls who talked me into trying out for a play. So the course of my life, and I can't say that somebody would have talked me into acting or that I would have been successful in some other career. But it was because of my rejections from Harvard, Yale, and Rice that I became an actor. Because I met those two girls at Tulane who said I could meet girls by doing a play. That was the beginning of it. And now there's so many things that have happened for me in this business that could just could not be accidents. When I went to New York, when I went to California, my agent in New York, I told her I wanted to do more movies. I'd done one movie, lots of commercials, but I wanted to do movies and TV. And I had some friends who had come to California from New York and who had some success, and I stayed in touch with them. And one fellow named Darryl Zwirling said he would pick me up at the airport, which he did. But anyway, my agent in New York, Fifi Osgard, made appointments for me with 3 commercial agents and 3 theatrical agents. So I was set up, I thought. So my friend Darryl picked me up at the airport. He said, "You want to go to a play tonight?" I said, "Yeah, sure." There was a theater called Words and Music where they did little musical things. So I went to the play with him. At intermission, we're standing in the alley next to the theater. Lady comes up to me and she says, "You're Basil Hoffman." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You know me. It's good to see you again. I'm Sandy Joseph." I said, "Sandy Joseph?" She said, "Yes, I'm married to Shelley Joseph." And Shelley was a commercial producer in Chicago, for whom I had worked many times. In those days, a lot of auditions were held in New York to go out of town to come, and they still are. So she said, "I've been waiting to hear from you." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I have your picture on my desk. Your agent sent me your picture." She was one of the agents to whom my agent in New York has sent a picture. What are the odds, the chance that I would have run into her at a play the first night that I was in? I don't think these things are accidents anymore. I think these things are directed. I believe that God has a hand in all of this. Oh, and then the theatrical. So I had a commercial agent right away. The theatrical agents my agent in New York sent me to didn't want me. So I met those 3 agents. They didn't want me. Actors I knew who were very successful in Hollywood introduced me to their agents. None of them wanted me. I was buying the Hollywood Reporter and Daily Variety every day. In those days, they were called the trades, and they came out every day. And once a week, every week, one day, Hollywood Reporter and Daily Variety would have a list of the productions going on in Hollywood. And they would list all the productions. They would list the name of the studio, the producers of the show, the name of the show, the producer of the show, the writer, the director, the casting director, and the phone number. And I thought, I'm going to call these people on the phone. And I saw a name that I recognized, a casting director who I knew from New York, a fellow named Joel Thurm. And he had been the casting director for the biggest producer on Broadway, a guy named David Merrick. And so I called Joel's office. And I said to the lady who answered the phone, I said, "Joel, I'd like to speak to Joel." She said, "Well, who's calling?" I said, "Basil Hoffman." I said, "I'm an actor. I'm in town from New York, and Joel knows me." She said, "Well, just a minute." A voice comes on the phone and says, "Hello?" I said, "Joel, this is Basil Hoffman. Remember me?" He said, "Yes, Basil. I remember you. When I wanted to hire you, you wouldn't work for me. tried to hire me to be a standby for Red Buttons in the national company of the Woody Allen play Play It Again, Sam. And Red Buttons was going to do the Woody Allen part. And through a series of auditions, I got myself an audition. I didn't have an agent at that time. And I was negotiating myself with Joel Thurm. And finally, after a series of conversations, Joel calls me on the phone. He says, "So Basil," he says, "we ready to make a deal on Play It Again, Sam?" I said, "Joel, I don't want to do it." He said, "What? What?" Because we've gone through this whole, I said, Joel, here's the thing. I make a lot of money in commercials. And I'm going to go out of town. I'm going to lose money. And if I ever get a chance to play this play, it'll be in Omaha, Nebraska one night. And nobody's going to see me. And I'll be out of town for a year. So I'm not going to do it. And so Joel was having fun with me in a way when I called him at CBS. And he was casting the Bob Newhart show. And that was the first Newhart show in the early 70s. Yeah. He said, "Do you know where CBS is in the Valley?" I said, "No." He said, "There's a part for you, I think, in Newhart." He said, "I want you to come out and read for it." So I went out. I read for it. Joel called me the next day. He said, "Basil, you didn't get the part." He said, "But they like you, and I want you to stay in touch. And, if there's anything you think I could do, give me a call." I said, "Well, Joel, there is something you could do." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, Joel, there are 4 other casting directors at CBS. I want to meet them." He said, "Okay." So I met these casting directors, and I realized that I could make phone calls and that they might be profitable. So now, one of the things I thank God for is the fact that I couldn't get an agent when I came to Hollywood. And the miracle was that not a single agent wanted me. Not the fact that some agents turned me down, but the fact that they all turned me down. And all of a sudden, casting directors became my career. I met 44 casting directors in 6 months by calling them on the phone. And a couple of casting directors, there was a casting director named casting director who cast the Mary Tyler Moore Show, who called an agent for me. There were other casting directors who called agents for me. I got to see a very big-time agent, and she said to me, "Basil, you're a very smart actor." And by the way, I didn't sign with her at that point because she didn't want me, but she would see me, and she said, "Basil, you're a very smart actor." I said, "Well, Joan, I'm a good actor." And she said, "Well, Basil," she said, "there are a lot of good actors." She said, "But you're a smart actor." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You have casting directors calling agents for you." And they did. I got a manager because of a casting director. That casting director, Tom Jennings, introduced me to a lawyer named Hurley Graffius. And Hurley's client list was Lee Van Cleef, Ralph Ballone, Cesar Romero, John Ireland, Joseph Cotton, and me. So I was on the roster with all of these huge stars, most of them toward the end of their careers. But still, I had a distinguished attorney manager to whom I would pay 10% if I got a job, and he would negotiate it for me. And he introduced me to Peter Bogdanovich, so I got a small part in At Long Last Love for Peter Bogdanovich. And that was my second movie, but also for a big-time director. My second movie that I did in Hollywood was, I went on location in Mexico for Stanley Donen, a picture called Lucky Lady. So I got a chance to work with Liza Minnelli and Gene Hackman, Burt Reynolds, and I'd worked with Burt Reynolds in the picture before that, in At Long Last Love. Subsequently, I ran into a very great casting director, a very great character actor named M. Emmett Walsh. We were walking down Sunset Boulevard, and I had known him from acting school. And he says, "Basil, I didn't know you were in Hollywood." I said, "Well, I've been here almost 6 months." months, Mike. And he said, so how's it going for you? I said, pretty well. Because at that time, I'd done the picture for Peter Bogdanovich. I had done 2 TV movies. And one of the TV movies that I did was a picture called Cage Without a Key. I had a meeting with a director named Buzz Kulik. I meet Buzz, and I said, well, it's good to see you again, Buzz. He said, have we met before? I said, well, we have, Buzz, but I have no way you could remember me, but I had a small part for you in The Defenders. He said, Basil, I owned that show. I said, I didn't know that. So anyway, I got the job. I got the part of a judge in this TV movie because I had done that little part in The Defenders in New York 10 years earlier. Meanwhile, Mike Walsh says, how are you doing? And I tell him I'd done 2 TV movies, I'd done a feature, I'd done 5 TV episodes. He said, wow, in 6 months, who's your agent? I said, well, Mike, I don't have an agent. He said, you want to meet my agent? I said, yeah. So Mike set up an appointment for me with Alex Brewis, who was his agent. And I had an agent for a few months. And then the casting director, Tom Jennings, who had been so helpful to me, and who had introduced me to that manager, became an agent at a very big-time agency. He said, he called me, he said, Basil, I'm an agent now, and I want you to be my client. I said, oh, I don't know, I'm with Alex Brewis, I don't know what to do. Finally, I thought, out of loyalty to Tom, that I would leave Alex, and I called Alex, and it was not pleasant, but I did. So Tom says, all right, now that you're my client, what can I do? You know, anything special? Like I said, yeah. I said, you know, I've met a lot of casting directors, but I need to see Alan Shane, who I knew in New York, but I haven't met him here yet. I haven't seen him, and I haven't seen him in 10 years. He said, well, Basil, when I was at Warner Brothers, Alan had an office right next door to mine. I'll call him. So I went to see Alan Shane, and Alan says, Basil, he says, are you still living in New Jersey? I said, Alan, I must have met you when I was so poor that I was living with my aunt and uncle in West Caldwell, New Jersey. I said, no, I've been out here and I'm doing well. And I said, well, Basil, he said, something's coming up that I think you're right for. And that was a meeting with Alan Pakula for All the President's Men. And I had mentioned to you earlier that I had done a play in New York called An Unpublished Story. Alan Pakula is looking at my resume. And he says, I see you did a play called An Unpublished Story. I said, yeah, I did, Alan. He said, well, Basil, we're doing a movie about a published story. He said, and I think maybe this will, and he hired me. And maybe Alan would not have hired me if he hadn't seen, if that play that meant nothing to him, nothing to me at that point, if that hadn't caught his attention on my resume. But as a result of that, I did Alan Pakula's next picture. I found out that Sidney Pollack was doing a picture called The Electric Horseman. And because I had apparently developed some kind of a relationship with Redford on All the President's Men, Redford sent me a note one day in the middle of filming, personal note in the mail, thanking me for my work in the film. And I thought, well, wow, you know, it's very appreciative. And it's a long story, but I don't want it's more involved than that. But he sent me a nice note. And when I heard that Redford was going to do The Electric Horseman for Sidney Pollack, I thought, well, you know, maybe there's a shot at this. And in the interim, I had done another picture for Alan Pakula. I did Alan Pakula's second picture, which was Comes a Horseman.
Now, Basil, let me just I don't want to get too far afield. Later in the show, we can go through some of the stories and tales of the film. I want to just focus a little bit more on the acting end here, sort of the craft and whatnot. So I don't want to get sort of, you know, taken away through the whole career right now. You were talking about some of the people, and it's interesting to talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff with the agents and whatnot, because that's one of the things I do want young actors to learn about. I remember early on you had said that you had mentioned about getting your equity card and your SAG and AFTRA card. Let me just ask a little bit about that, because I know in some of the other people I've interviewed before you, they've spoken on getting into the actors unions, both the stage equity and the screen. How important was that for you in terms of getting more work, getting both the equity and the SAG cards? Is that sort of like a rite of passage for a young actor?
That's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah, it is, because ultimately, you can't have a career in this industry without belonging to the unions. I mean, you just have to. That's just the way it is. Uh, I think that my own feeling is that an actor should let his work and the time in the business get him the union cards, because sometimes there are a lot of nice parts that an actor can play that he wouldn't be able to play because they're non-union if he had gotten into the union. Mm. And it might be better for the actor to get that experience and get some, just get a little experience if he can, to get some time in the industry under his belt or under her belt. And if an actor is going to have a career, the career will get the actor the union cards. It will just happen. The actor will meet people. Somebody will see the actor in a play or something and say, I have to have you in this movie. And then all of a sudden the actor gets the part in the movie and he gets the union card. And that's the way it works for most actors. That's how it happens.
Now, you're in your late 70s. Do you already collect a pension, or are you still a working actor?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah, I have a wonderful career, and I say that God has blessed me because my career is better now than it has ever been before. And I have not experienced ageism or any other age-affected affliction in terms of the industry at all.
Now, let me ask about art and acting. And before we get into the actual thing, because you've written some books on acting, and I want to talk about that, but I want to sort of give some of this background stuff that people rarely talk about in interviews, too. What sacrifices for art have you made? You mentioned that you got married in 1988, so you were almost 50 before you got married. Did you sort of put off marriage or trying to have a family or anything till later in your life because you wanted to make it as an actor? Or was that just something that was happenstance?
Happenstance, pretty much.
Yeah.
And again, I could say God directed me to not get married and have children. I feel like I had been married to my career the whole time. My career suffered a little bit, I think, in the years that I was married because I had a real marriage. I'm going to blow my nose here. Okay. I know it's very rude, but I have an allergy. I don't know what's going on here. The weather has changed.
That's fine.
I want to thank you and your audience for forgiving me that. I really have been married to my career. I'm very focused as an actor. I'm very career-oriented. I believe that an actor really must consider the business end of the business to be extremely important. It's funny, show business is 2 words, and only 1/3 of it is show, and 2/3 of it is business. Yeah. And I think that really is the way it is. An actor has to be able to monetize his career, get the jobs, and I know that through my years in acting classes and acting school, there were a lot of actors who were more talented than I believe. Who never got out of the classroom, never got a union card, never got a job because of the fear, maybe. I don't know, fear, I would say.
Now, does the SAG card also apply to doing commercials? For example, you started in the 1960s, and apparently you've done hundreds of commercials. Are most of the big ad agencies in New York or LA, do they work with unionized actors?
They do. The industry has changed a bit, so there really are a lot of non-union commercials now. There didn't used to be, but now I guess the commercial producers have found a way to save some money. I'm not really sure how that works because I really only do union work.
Yeah, and you said that you made a good living doing commercial acting. I know when I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had Nancy Walker, I think, did Bounty Towels. I forget the actor who was Mr. Whipple for Charmin. Was it your hope at that time that you could get like a part like that where you could be the spokesman for some product for 10, 15 years and make a lot of money. Like nowadays, there are a handful of actors. The Progressive Insurance woman Flo is probably the most famous one of the last decade. Is that something that do you still get any kind of residuals from commercials too, or?
Commercial residuals run out.
Yeah.
Residuals from television never run out. So when a movie shows on television, you get residuals. And by the way, I will tell you a funny story parenthetically to this. I go to the mailbox one day and I get a residual for a movie called Being There.
Uh-huh.
The picture with Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
Great picture. I would know if I had done that movie. I mean, you would think that I would know if I had done that movie. I'm thinking, why are they sending me I'm not going to send it back, but why are they sending me residuals for Being There? And I couldn't figure it out. And then I get another residual for Being There. And then one day I caught Being There. I love the movie, so every chance I get, I watch it. But I watched the movie and I'm thinking, why are they serious? And Peter Sellers in this movie loved to watch television.
Yeah.
And at one moment when he's watching television, one of my commercials comes on. And they are still sending me residuals for Being There. For a commercial that I did, a television commercial that's in the movie.
So it's actually a real commercial that they used in the movie.
It was a real commercial. It was a real commercial that I had done, and they paid me for that.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about acting in general. When you're doing a commercial, and I'll start with the commercial, then we'll go to stage and then film and television. And I had asked a few of the other actors who may have done a little commercials. Do you actually, if you're doing something like, a man who's selling paper towels or something, do you do that method thing where you have to really believe in it and sell it? Or is that just because it's only maybe 20 or 30 seconds that you might have something? Is that just sort of just being there, to use the movie title? How much acting is involved in these commercials?
Quite a lot, and they hold a lot of auditions, and almost every commercial you see, everybody in the commercial is perfect. They're just perfect. They're just wonderful. And I have a rule, and I teach this to actors, and it has to do with commercials, it has to do with movies, television, plays. And I tell every actor that every script he reads, he has to obey two rules. There are two rules for every script. And one is the actor has to know that that script is the best script ever written. And the second thing the actor has to accept is that the script was written for him. And you ask, how much do you have to believe it? You have to believe it totally. You have to know that that character is you and you're in that situation. There is a big difference between a really good commercial, commercials in general, and really good actors, directors, particularly in features. A commercial director has a very tight window in which to get his message through. And it's probably, if it's a 30-second commercial, he has 20-something seconds to get that message through. So the director knows almost exactly what he wants. A good film director knows pretty much what he doesn't want when he sees it. Yeah. Directors in features, especially big-time directors, really good directors, they want to be surprised. They want to be surprised. And a good director will let the actors go. And if the director sees something he doesn't like or doesn't want, he'll do some directing. But mostly directors in features don't direct. Directors in commercials can't help themselves. They direct all over the place. But it's because it's a different medium. It's a different form. It has a different purpose.
John Huston, I believe, was the director who said basically that all films start with good screenplays. And I've always been of the belief, for example, that if you have that movies and television, but especially movies, they're called motion pictures, that the action, the narrative is more important than the visuals. In other words, I think films are more a descendant of literature than they are of photographs, in a sense. And because of that, I've often thought that the best way to judge an actor when I'm watching a film is you listen to the writing, you see the setup, and you can see whether or not you're dealing with a good screenplay, and how much does that actor raise the bar of what the scene is. If you have a really great, you can have just a good, solid, competent actor, and if you're dealing with a really well-written film, they'll they'll give a great performance because it's well written. But you can get, just a mediocre or an average script, and you can get an actor who is really great, is going to raise the bar of that whole thing, sort of like, Atlas putting the whole work on his shoulders, raise it up. Is that, when you think of some of the acting that you've done in general in any medium, is that sort of the thing that you try to do, that even if you only have in a 2-hour movie, you only appear, 3 minutes in the film, do you try to raise the bar on each of those scenes? And if so, how do you do it? You're not one of those actors that's, overdoing it, but, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I approach every script the same way. Every script I read, to me, is the best script ever written. And I will tell you there's a reason for this. That if an actor finds a defect in a script, every defect he finds in that script will become a defect in his performance. If you find something wrong with the script and you start finding things wrong with the script, pretty soon the script will be horrible and your performance will be horrible. And if you read a script and you say, God, this is good, this is wonderful, what a great character this guy has created, and you play it with that point of view, you will elevate that script. And I think it's incumbent upon the actor to do that. I remember a quote from the great, great character actor Walter Brennan, who I think won 4 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor. And Walter Brennan said, "They don't pay me to make a good script look good."
Now, let me talk a little bit about sort of acting in a more theoretical bent, because you've written some books on acting, and I want to spend the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes talking about some of the books. You have a book that you wrote about a cold call acting. First off, for those that don't know, what is a cold call, and what was the book about, and how to maximize potential?
Well, what they call in the industry, what they call cold reading, and by the way, a cold reading is never a cold reading because the actor has to get a script in advance. He has to work on the role a little bit before he auditions, but they're called cold readings. Auditions are called cold readings. I got a call in 1998 from a very, very good friend of mine who has a lot of plays published by Samuel French. He writes scenes and monologues for actors, dozens as a matter of fact. He publishes scenes and monologues from Neil Simon's plays. He has a deal with Neil Simon's people, I guess, for things like that. So he's quite a big publisher of theatrical books. And he called me one day. He's a dear friend. And he said, "Basil, can you write a book on cold reading?" I said, "Maybe. Why would you ask?" He said, "My distributor says there isn't really a good book on auditioning for actors, especially cold readings." He said, "If you could write a book, I would publish it." So I said, "Well, let me think about it." And I called him back. I said, "I'll write a book. I'll call it Cold Reading and How to Be Good at It." I said, "It's going to be a little bitty book because it's not that much." And I joked at first. I said, "You mean there'd be a market for a book that's 3 pages long?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's not that much." But I got into the acting part of it. So the book is about 60 pages, I think. So I wrote that book. And I have people stopping me to this day, telling me how important that book has been to them. Several years later, 2005, I would say 2004 or 5, I got a call from another friend of mine who has been my publicist and manager for many years, who also publishes a few books. And he said, "Basil," he said, "do you have another book in you?" I said, "Is this rhetorical?" He said, "No, no." He said, "If you have another book in you, I might publish it." I said, "Well, let me call Roger, my other friend." I said, because I would owe Roger the book if I wrote another book. So I called Roger and I said, "Roger, Brad called me and wanted to know if I could write another book. Do you want to if I wrote another book? He said, Basil, I don't want to do it. He said, I don't want to. He said, let Brad do it. He said, I don't want to. He said, I don't want to add another book to my list. I just don't want to do it. He said, your book is fine. It's doing well. I don't want to do it. So I called Brad. I said, Brad, all right, I'm going to write a book, and I'll call it Acting and How to Be Good at It. So I wrote this book in 2000. I think it came out in 2006. The first edition, I think, came out in 2006. And maybe I started writing it in 2006. I remember that I had finished my version of it, but before I went to press, I said, you know, Brad, there are a lot of people who I've mentioned in this book. I mentioned a lot of actors and directors and writers and people I work with, Spielberg, Ron Howard, Christopher Walken. And I thought I should send copies of this to people and make sure that it's okay, and see if they'll approve it. And they all did. Every one of them said it was just fine. And I get a call one day from a lady who says, Basil Hoffman? I said, yeah. She said, can you hold on? Sidney Pollack is on the line. I said, oh, okay. So said, Baz, how are you? I'm fine, Sidney. He said, Basil, you sent me a copy of this book you're publishing. He said, you wrote. Looks interesting to me. He says, I have a problem. I said, what is that, Sidney? And Sidney quoted something that I had said about him in the book. He said, Basil, I know I said it, but it sounds so arrogant. Can you say it differently? I said, sure. And what Sidney had said was, when he was directing Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie, that at one point, if they disagreed on something, he said, Dustin and I would go into my trailer, and we'd argue about it for an hour, and then we'd come out and do it my way. And Sidney said, can you say it differently? So I gave him a couple. He said, okay. He said, use it. He said, he said, I'm going to read your whole book. He said, I'm going to read the whole book. He said, I like it. He said, maybe I'll give you some for this book. I said, all right, whatever that meant. So I got a call a few weeks later from Sidney's assistant, and she said, Basil, she said, do you have a fax machine? I said, yeah. She said, Sidney wrote something for you, for your book. So I have a couple of lines from Sidney Pollack as the foreword for my book.
Hmm. Now, let me just ask, with this book about acting, how much bigger was that than the reading book?
200 pages.
200 pages. So I know, there's, in the last 100 years, Stanislavski and Adler and Strasberg and stuff. Do you address that kind of thing? Because one of the people I interviewed earlier told me that he just pretends. If he's in a situation where he comes home and he finds his mother's been raped and killed by bikers, that's what he pretends to be. Are you an advocate of any one method versus another? Digging into childhood pain to do something? Or are you someone that, okay, here's the script, I'm going to pretend? Or is it just what works for the particular person?
The script informs me, and I think it should inform every actor, that the character is the character that the writer created. It's not about the actor. Every script, I tell actors, this script was written for you. But that an actor shouldn't confuse that to think that the script was written about him. There is nothing in the actor's personal life that should get onto the screen or onto the stage. The actor should lose his ego as much as possible and try to do what the script tells him. And it's amazing how much information there is in the lines, in the narrative, in things that other characters say about one's character. And you begin to get a tremendous sense of how this is and how this feels and who this person is. And as an actor, I'm different from a lot of actors in that I'm a blank slate. So I have to do what the script tells me to do. I know a friend, I'm not going to mention his name because I'm going to say something unkind about him, so I'm not going to mention his name. But his point of view in acting is that if he reads a script and it doesn't sound like him, personally, he tries to get that line changed. So it's like, I wouldn't say it that way. And my answer to him personally has been, well, of course you wouldn't say it that way. He didn't write it about you. He wrote it about a character. You have to do the character. He said, no, I don't do that. I don't do that. So that's fine for certain kinds of actors. But I do a lot of things. And if somebody goes to my website, basilhoffman.com, there are a lot of film clips. And one can see that a lot of things I do are just so different from other things. And it's because every script tells me something different.
But now, for example, there are people who, I think I saw you on an episode of MASH and some other long-running television shows. If you're playing a character for, say, 5 or 6 seasons, and you've done 20-something episodes, maybe you've done 120, 150 episodes at that point. At what point, if let's say you had been one of those actors, do you think it's not right if, let's say, a new writer comes on and this is his first, second, third episode that he's written for the show, and you've portrayed a character for 150 episodes, wouldn't it be feasible for you to say, well, that character wouldn't be like that, because you'd know the back history of the character much more than the writer would, wouldn't you?
No, I agree with you completely. I think in that instance, a conversation would be good to have.
Yeah.
And I think that the showrunner, I think the executive producer of the show, somebody who's been with the show for a long time, would also engage in that conversation and say, we might want to change this a little bit, because by that time, the actor knows much more about the character than the new writer would know. I will tell you a funny story, because you asked about the method.
Yeah.
I was in Moscow in 1991 doing a picture called The Ice Runner. And I met a very great Russian actor named Eugene Lazarev, who, by the way, now lives in Los Angeles. And he teaches acting at the University of Southern California. And Eugene had taught at the Moscow Art Theater. He had taught at Gorky Arts. But he had a great career as an actor. Sometimes he's called the Marlon Brando of Russia. I mean, he was quite an actor. And we had lunch one day at Cantor's Delicatessen in Hollywood. And we were talking about acting, and he knew that I taught. I actually got him a job doing a Russian, because somebody asked if I could do it. So a casting director called me and said, can you do an authentic Russian accent? I said, yeah, probably. I said, but if you want an authentic Russian actor, I'll get one for you. So I got Eugene Lazarev a voiceover doing a Russian thing. But anyway, Eugene and I are having lunch, and he says to me, Basil, he says, when you teach, he says, or act, he said, when you act, you teach, he said, what do you think of emotional memory? What do you think of memory of emotion? Because this is something that Stanislavski taught for a long time. And I said, well, Eugene, I don't use it. I think that if an actor wants to use it, if an actor feels that he or she is personally deficient in getting up one emotion or another, to work on that at home would be a good thing. I said, but I don't think that it's useful for an actor to do that in the work, because it gets in the way of the character if the actor is dependent on his own personal experiences. I said, so Eugene, do you use it? What do you think of emotional memory? Now, this is a guy who taught at the Moscow Art Theater. And he gave me what at the moment, I laughed when he did it, because I thought it was a typical Russian response. I said, so Eugene, what do you think of emotional memory? And he did this. I thought that was probably a characteristic Russian response, but I gathered that he didn't like it.
And did he dub your role that you got him? Was that a role you were doing, and he dubbed your role?
No. This was an entirely different thing. This was, I think it was a commercial.
Okay.
They needed a Russian accent for a commercial out here.
All right.
And a casting director who I've known for many years called me and said, Basil, can you do an authentic Russian accent? I said, yeah, I can. I said, but why don't you get a real Russian? She said, well, who would you recommend? So I said, oh, yeah. And I recommended Eugene, and he got the part.
Okay, well, let's end this first segment here. In the next segment, I want to talk about some of the differences between stage and film acting, full body acting, and some other features of acting itself. We'll do that when we return. I'm speaking with Basil Hoffman about acting. But before I get into acting, I just want to relate a couple of anecdotes because I've done now, you're, I think, my 110th interview, and this is my fifth actor interview. And it's interesting because you mentioned a couple of people in the first segment that I just wanted to tell you a little story on. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with a woman named Carol Demas, and she has a terrific story about when she had lost a part in a David Merrick play, and she had to go to, I guess, a SAG arbitration hearing against him, and she won. And so it's an interesting story that she tells about losing this part. I think it was to Patti LuPone, and she was doing Topol. I think it was No No Nanette was a part in an LA theater. So I wanted to mention that. And I had done a show last year about Rod Serling with his daughter and a couple of his biographers, or people who had written about him. And you'd mentioned Buzz Kulik, and I don't know if you know this, and I told them, but when I was a kid, back around 75, not 70, 71, in my neighborhood, which is right on the Brooklyn-Queens border in New York, they used to film a lot of porno films back then. There was a studio, and I don't know if you know it, but Buzz Kulik started out doing stag films. And I remember one day when I was about 5 or 6 years old, the actors, after their scenes or whatnot, they would send us little kids, 5, 6 year olds. They'd say, go down to the local deli, get us something to eat. And, we get there and they'd give us 50 cents or something tip. And I remember one day meeting Kulik, and I saw on his wall a photo of The Fugitive, David Jansen, because he had done a film in like 67 or 68, Macho Callahan, I think it was, which is an underrated Western with Jansen. Jansen never made it big in films, but it's just interesting just to hear these kinds of stories. And this is an interesting thing, how you meet different or hear different stories about different people and whatnot. So anyway, those are just the little things that intersections with Merrick and Kulik that I just wanted to point out. But anyway, let's get back to acting. And I've asked most of the actors a similar type question about the difference between stage and film acting. And I've known mostly stage actors, because most of the actors that I have known have generally not had any great success. Probably the most successful actor I knew had a small part in a Coen Brothers film about 6 or 7 years ago. And I know when I first started watching about a decade or so ago some of the classics of world cinema, I noticed quite a difference in the way that foreign or non-American actors act versus those in North America, and also the way that some of these masses, the Fellinis, the Bergmans, the Kurosawas, the Antonionis, the way they would hold shots of someone in an emotional distress, for example, but you'd see their full body, and you'd see someone slumping their shoulders, and you'd see someone maybe shot from the back. Yasujiro Ozu, the great Japanese director, often did this. And in America, even in the golden age of the 40s and 50s of Hollywood, you'd always see the close-up on the face, and if you see conversation, you'll see face, 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 rather than say two people in a frame talking back and forth to one another. To what degree, for example, is body acting in your sort of arsenal of what you can do rather than just facial acting? And is it more important for the stage?
I would say not, and I'm one of those people who doesn't believe there's a difference between stage and movie acting. And sometimes I ask an actor, I say, uh, when you see a film version of a play, like it's videotaped, what is your impression of the acting? And they often say, well, it looks fake. And I say, well, the reason it looks fake is because it is fake. And if you make a fake performance big, it's just going to become more fake. And the difference between the stage and film is that on film, you are really required to tell the truth in every way. On the stage, some actors believe they can get away with less. And I don't believe that to be true.
What do you mean by less? What do you mean by less?
less quality in the work,
Okay.
less attention to detail, because they believe somehow that detail is not going to be seen.
Huh.
But they would be surprised that detail is seen on the stage, and you get a great sense of truth. And I remember I had the real good fortune in New York to see John Gielgud on stage 5 times. I saw him do Ivanov with Vivian Leigh. I saw him do School for Scandal with Ralph Richardson. I saw him do Home with Ralph Richardson. I saw him do Tiny Alice. I saw him do, he did his one-man show, The Ages of Man, which I saw. And actually, I heard him a 6th time because he directed Richard Burton in Hamlet. And in that Hamlet that he directed, he played the voice of Hamlet's father. So, and Gielgud was one of my all-time favorite actors. And the interesting thing about watching him in Ivanov with Vivian Leigh, and I had a very close-up seat, and I was thinking, this guy is giving a fabulous film performance. And thinking, how could all of these quiet, beautiful moments be seen in the back of the theater? Well, John Gielgud is one of the great stage actors of all time. Of course it could be seen in the back of the theater. But he didn't sacrifice truth for his stage performance. And when you talk about full body acting, all acting is total. So it's the mask, it's the face, it's the voice, it's the eyes, it's the hands, it's the feet, it's the posture. The great actor Michael Chekhov wrote a book called To the Actor, and he has something that he called the psychological gesture, and it really had to do with how a character's body changes because of the requirements of the character, the way the character feels, the way the character behaves, and all of a sudden it becomes total. And I believe that completely. Well, so in answer to your question about the difference between film and stage acting, I would say is that you have to stay within the medium. The audience must see and hear everything you do. The actor on stage must not fall off the stage. The actor on screen must not walk out of the frame. And I would say that those are the only differences to me.
When you talk about gestures, I'd mentioned this to a couple of the other actors. I know I saw a documentary on Kurosawa, and Kurosawa was big, especially when he's working with someone like Toshiro Mifune. And Mifune was, to Japan what John Wayne was times 3 or 4, in that he did many varied roles, but he was always this titanic presence on screen. But Kurosawa in each role would say to Mifune, you have to find some little gesture, some little thing that separates your characters. Like he played a character who was a doctor, Redbeard, and he'd be stroking his beard in one movie. In another movie, he might be, doing a little kink in his neck or something. Is that what you mean by gestural stuff, or?
That's part of it. That's part of it. A good actor will identify the character to the audience the first moment he's seen on screen. And by that I mean the audience should know a lot of things about that character at first glance, as soon as possible, even before the actor speaks, because the actor is identified, the character is identified long before the character speaks. You might see the character in the background. You might see the character walking upstairs and not speaking. And I did a picture called The Artist, in which none of the actors were heard. It was a silent film.
Yeah.
And every character had to be identified without sound, completely visually. Body, face, the feelings have to be seen. The intent has to be seen. The person has to be seen. And by the way, doing that film was one of the great gifts that I've received in my life, getting to do that picture.
Now, I opened the interview by calling you a character actor. You reference yourself that several times. Generally, that kind of term is used in film and television for minor roles where you have maybe a 2 or 3 minutes on screen in a hour, or 2 hour film. Have you, though, had lead roles on stage, where you've been one of the lead characters, or is there such a thing, too, as a character actor on stage?
I've had some lead roles. I've had mostly supporting roles, I would say mostly.
Mhm.
I had a lead in Rio, I Love You, which I shot for Paulo Sorrentino in Brazil, which came out in America this year, which was released in the United States this year. And Rio, I Love You was 10 different little films, directed by 10 different international directors, written by 10 different international writer-directors, and with 10 different international casts. So Emily Mortimer and I starred in that piece.
Mm.
But I would say there's still no difference. There's still no difference. The actor, because an actor has one scene or two scenes, or one line or two lines or three lines, it doesn't make that character less of a person. It just means that at that particular moment in that character's life, we see less of that character.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that that character is less of a person. So the actor has to do the same work, whether he's playing a lead or whether he's playing what one would call a character part. I do believe, by the way, that every role is a character role. And by that I mean that every character requires the same attention. And there are no one-dimensional parts. There are one-dimensional actors, but there are no one-dimensional parts.
Have you done mostly sort of modern plays, or have you done in a significant part of like Shakespeare or some, the Ben Jonsons at local festivals? Have you done more dramas versus comedies versus musicals? What, on stage at least, what has been sort of the breakdown? What have you sort of specialized, if anything?
I haven't specialized, and I've done, except for acting school, except for Tulane and the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, I have never done a classic play. So I guess I'm a modern actor, I guess, in a way you might say. I have played, I did get to play a wonderful lead in a number of different venues for a very wonderful writer, Hollywood writer named William Blinn. He wrote a play called Walking Peoria, and I had the lead in that play. I did the world premiere of the play, and I did the second production as well of that play.
Have you done musicals? Can you sing? I mean, have you as well?
In 1968, I auditioned for William Hammerstein, who was directing his father's play, South Pacific, at Jones Beach. And you're familiar with Jones Beach, of course. And I have another story about this as well. But I auditioned for William Hammerstein for a tiny role, the smallest speaking part in the picture.
I'm assuming he's related to Roger?
His son.
Oh, okay.
Oscar Hammerstein's son was William Hammerstein. Yeah, William Hammerstein and James Hammerstein were Oscar Hammerstein's two sons, and both of them had careers directing their father's stuff.
Oh.
But William Hammerstein was directing South Pacific at Jones Beach, and I auditioned for him. I read for him. And he said, "So, Basil," he said, "that's terrific. Do you sing?" I said, "No, Billy, I don't sing, but I know that Professor has to sing Nothing Like a Dame with the chorus, so I'll sing that for you." So I sang it, and he said, "Who told you you don't sing?" I said, "Well, I don't, Billy. I'm an actor, and I've not really studied singing. I don't." He said, "Well, it's too bad." He said, "It's a big voice. You should work on it." Anyway, he hired me. So now you ask me if I sing, and I say, "Well, I have a big voice, but not a pleasant one." Well, I have one other thing to say about South Pacific. They did South Pacific. They did every play 2 years, and I think it was because the investment in the sets and and getting the rights to the show and the lead actors and all of that. They did South Pacific a second year, and I was doing a show in Paramus, New Jersey at the time, and I don't know if they were going to hire me again to play Professor or not. The actor they hired to replace me in that second year in South Pacific was James Woods.
Let me talk a little bit about film and television. acting too, because looking at your IMDb page, looks like you have done a lot of sitcoms and also some few dramatic roles. When you get a part, say, you know, I've seen you done Barney Miller and Night Court and MASH, where you're just on for an episode or something. Do you find it easier to do one or the other, you know, a comedic or a dramatic role, or is it just, you know, all the same to you when you come on and you just have that 2 minutes on screen?
It's all the same,
Yeah,
to me. And characters in comedies, the best character work in a comedy is when the character takes it very seriously and believes it. Because the comedy is in the lines, the comedy is in the situation, but the actor must not try to be funny. And I remember a wonderful story about the great movie actor, and he was a character actor in everything he did. He played leads all the time, Frederick March. And Frederick March and his wife, Florence Eldridge, were doing a Broadway play. And there was at one point in the play where the situation led to Frederick March's character saying, "I'll take the coffee." And because of the setup, it was a big laugh line. Every night when he said that, there was a huge laugh. And then the laughter stopped. The laughter never came again. And this went on performance after performance. It was going on for several weeks. And finally, March said to his wife, he said, "Florence, that line used to get tremendous laughs, and the audience doesn't laugh anymore. What could be wrong?" She said, "I'll tell you what was wrong." She said, "It was funny when you were asking for the coffee. It stopped being funny when you were asking for the laugh."
A lot of people, when they watch a sitcom especially, which is now down to maybe 21, 22 minutes, even back in the heyday of sitcoms in the 70s, it was probably 25 or 26 minutes, often I think overlook the impact of an episodic television director. I recently watched, for example, on the Television Arts and Academy website, the Emmy.org, a conversation with Peter Bonners, who used to be on the Newhart Show, and now he's directed many. I don't know. Have you ever worked with him, by the way?
I have not.
No. Okay.
No, I know. I've never met him, but I know who he is or
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, and so I was watching that. It was just interesting because he said that one of the things that he did on when he after Newhart directed probably 40 or 50 different sitcoms over the last 35, 40 years, and he was telling all his stories. He said, when you have good actors, a good TV director gets out of their way, which seems to be the opposite when I think of some of the film directors. And you've mentioned a handful of the bigger names that you've mentioned, some of the big name film directors. Earlier this morning, I was watching a little short documentary on Martin Scorsese talking about directing too. Is it true that, well, have you noticed that TV directors and film directors, especially big budget major films, is there more of the auteur theory? Is there more of a hands-on approach by the Scorseses or the Redfords or the Paculas versus, say, someone directing Barney Miller or Night Court or any of these other sitcoms?
I would say that for feature directors, it's much more in the casting. It's hard to say. Much more in the casting for the feature director than it is for the television director. But I will tell you two specific performances. You mentioned Barney Miller.
Yeah.
I can't tell you who the director was for Barney Miller, and I will tell you why. Because once the show was blocked, that director practically disappeared because Danny Arnold, who produced the show, came down and directed the show. And when I did Seinfeld, it was exactly the same experience. It was exactly the same experience. I don't know who directed that show. The executive producer came down and directed.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that because a 20-minute or 22-minute episode is like Peter Bonner says, that hopefully you hire good, competent people, and you don't want to basically just screw it all up. Or I mean, is there the sense, I guess, that it's just one episode of maybe 100 or 150. So when there is there the lack of care, or is it just simply because it's easier to get professionals to do just boom 20 minutes in a week's time than to do a 6 month shoot?
I think that there are shows that hire a director for the season. So the director will direct every episode. And I think, and I hate to categorize this because I don't know and I don't want to demean anybody, but the directors who are hired for a season to direct every episode, they often own part of the show and they really know the show and they are the directors. If different directors are hired week after week, different directors come in, the executive producer of the show knows the show better, and will and I know when I did MASH, the first time I did MASH, Burt Metcalf was the associate producer of the show and the casting director. When I did my second episode of MASH was 7 years later, and I guess it was 5 years later. Burt Metcalf had become the executive producer of the show, and he directed all the episodes. And I think that when you have the continuity of one director, and it has to do with the status of that director, maybe in the business, and the director's reputation, and all of those things, and that director is left alone because that show is a hit because of that director's hand. But if a director comes in to direct one episode, that show is not a hit because of that director. That show's a hit because of the other elements. The other elements are more important than that one-stop director coming in to do the show, my opinion. I will tell you, though, that I have largely been not directed in film. And I think that's the way the great directors work. The Coen brothers direct a little more than other directors. Alan Pakula will leave you alone. Redford pretty much leaves you alone. Sidney Pollack would leave you alone. Paolo Sorrentino left me alone. And I have to preface this by saying most of the jobs I've gotten, and particularly in feature films, have not been through auditions. They've been through meetings, or that somebody would call me on the phone and make a deal. And that's what happened with Rio, I Love You, and going to Brazil. And the same thing was true with The Electric Horseman, working for Sidney Pollack. I did that picture because Redford had asked for me. So I don't. Sidney never directed me, by the way. There was never a word of direction from Sidney. When I did Rio, I Love You, I was on the set, and the first time Paolo Sorrentino ever heard me say the lines was when we did the first camera rehearsal. And I don't think I got more than one line out of my mouth when Paolo looked at me and he said, no. I knew what he meant. I think I had a second choice. And after that, he never directed me again, except for one point. At one point in the film, he said in one scene, he said, you could take more time.
Now,
and that was the only direction I got from Polo after that.
Have there ever been times when you've been either in a show or a film and you're just there a day or two and someone says, no, it's just not working out? And was it something that you couldn't provide them with, or was it something maybe just you didn't gel with the other actor or something? Do you get those kinds of things? And I'm not talking personality clash, just on screen, for example, there isn't a chemistry with someone, whether maybe it's the humor doesn't work or something.
It hasn't happened for me. I have rarely worked with actors with whom I don't have chemistry of some kind, or that the characters don't work, because I've been blessed to work with fabulous actors, generous actors. I've worked with, in fact, I would say that the Academy Award-winning actors I've worked with have been the most generous on the set and in the scenes. Jason Robards, with whom I worked twice, very generous actor. Jane Fonda, very generous. Christopher Walken, Academy Award winner. Christopher Plummer was extremely generous to me when we did The Money Changers. Donald Sutherland when we did Ordinary People. People have behaved very well. Peter Falk when I did Columbo with him. I have very rarely worked with actors with him, and I can't even remember a situation in which I worked with an actor and it wasn't going to work. I do remember, however, an experience working with Michelle Schumacher on a picture called Three Geezers, in which I worked with her husband, J.K. Simmons.
Oh.
And Michelle directed the hell out of me in every scene. So much, I thought, I'm going to be fired. And this went on day after, and she wasn't treating me badly, but she directed me a lot. And finally I realized I wasn't going to be fired, and I found out later that she loved everything I did. That she just loved everything I did. She was complimentary to me, about me, to everybody else. She sent me a beautiful note, and I remember that Charlton Heston said something once about William Wyler. He said about how hard William Wyler is on his actors on the set. He said he puts you through the tortures of hell. He said, but then you come out smelling like a rose. And the funny thing is, everybody who ever worked for William Wyler said that. But when William Wyler was asked how he got such good performances out of his actors, he said, I always work with good actors.
I want to ask you about improvisation, because this is something that especially a lot of young actors talk about. And I know knowing some young actors especially, they feel that helps them, or when they're doing improv, whether it's at an improv troupe or if they are been hired for something and a scene isn't working, they feel that they contribute a bit more. Have you ever had an instance, whether it's either in you said probably not in a commercial, but on stage or in a film or a television show, where a scene just wasn't working and the director said, Basil, and whoever you may have been working with, something's just not right here. Do you want to try it this way or whatnot? And then the two of you, the other actor or something, go off and say, do you enjoy that, or do you prefer being told, to hit my marks, kind of thing?
Well, I have a psychosis, actually, and I'll tell you what it is, and it's what every actor has. If the actor is completely left alone, and the director never says anything to the actor says, why doesn't he say anything to me? Why doesn't he say that that's good or say something? If the director pays a lot of attention to the actor and keeps directing him, the actor will say, like me, why does he keep directing me? Am I going to get... So you're not going to please an actor. You're just not going to please an actor, I think, in that regard.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I can give you two stark differences from recent experience, very recent experiences in the last year. Working with the Coen brothers, you do not change a word on the Coen brothers. And that's fine for me, because I think a script is sacred. And I do the words of the script. I want to do every word that's written. The Coen brothers demand every single word. They know exactly how it should sound. They know how it should look. They know where the camera's going to be. And there are directors who don't necessarily work that way. I did a picture called The Last Word with Amanda Seyfried and Shirley MacLaine, directed by Mark Pellington. And when I worked for Mark, I did the scene as written. And then Mark said, okay, let's play with it. And Mark wanted whatever came out of me, my own words, a different look, a different feeling, a different thought. So there are directors who work in different ways, and a good professional actor has to be flexible and know that he can adapt to all of those things.
The first actress that I interviewed, Karen Austin, told me that She actually likes working with bad actors at times because she says that it's like working with children or pets, and that you never know what's going to be, and it excites her because a bad actor, you don't know if they're actually going to get it this time or they're going to do something that's going to crack you up. Have you ever had experience? You don't have to name names, where you've dealt with someone who's just, it's take 123 and they're just not doing it or something, and and is there a sense of frustration that get builds up in you when you're dealing with someone who simply isn't up to the task? Do you feel empathy for them? Do you try to help them out in some way?
I have never had that experience.
No.
I don't know what Karen Austin's experience was with bad actors. Karen Austin worked with a lot of big directors and a lot of big actors.
Yeah.
So I don't know who she worked with who would have been in that category. I will say one thing that can become very painful on a set for everybody concerned, and that's when an actor can't remember his lines.
Mm.
It just, nobody wants to be there. No actor wants to be there when another actor is struggling. And I have been in that situation with actors and seen that a few times, and it's not a good thing. But for the most part, I've been blessed, Dan. I've just been blessed that I've gotten to work with wonderful, wonderful actors and actors who want every other actor to be better, want every other actor to be good. And that's kind of how I feel with actors too. I want every actor that I work with to just be the best they can be. It helps everybody for actors to be at the top of their game and to be good.
Now, I've asked this question in similar forms to some of the other people too. Is acting at once is the most out there art? It's a performing art, and I sort of distinguish that to a degree. For if you're writing a symphony, if you're writing a novel or a play or a screenplay or something, there's that creative demiurge. Acting, singing, dancing are more interpretive. As you said, there's the words. Now you have to put your stamp on them to a certain degree. But yet, despite the fact that there's less of you in it, in the sense that you're not Eugene O'Neill writing about his alcoholic family or something. If you're doing an O'Neill play, you're going to spin that, and you're going to try to make something that's maybe not something that you've ever experienced into something personal, and you're going to be that character on stage. If you're Jamie, the youngest son in Long Day's Journey or something, and you're going to try to get the blood from the stone to really grip the audience or whatnot. Is there an advantage, say, if you are an introvert or an extrovert as a regular person, if you are very private about your personal details or more open about them? To what degree does your own, say, not only persona but personality, your own ability to get beyond yourself, help you or detract in some way? Because you're basically taking something that maybe a scene that is very personal. If I'm typing a scene that's very personal onto my computer, it's just me and the typewriter. But you're on there on a stage with several hundred or maybe millions of people watching it over the course of years. How do you sort of transmute that ultra personal into something for the masses?
I don't actually. I'm different from a lot of actors I know in that I don't direct myself, and I can't see myself on stage or on film. And I don't, and what I mean is I don't watch myself performing as I'm doing it. It's never me. It's never me. It's never about me. I think I'm maybe more outgoing as a person than many actors are. But I've seen interviews with actors who seemed almost withdrawn when they're being interviewed, and you watch their work, and it pops out at you. And I can think particularly of Alec Guinness. If you've ever seen an Alec Guinness performance on film, it's huge, and it's wonderful, and it's thorough, and it's complete, and it's beautiful to watch. And if you see Alec Guinness being interviewed, it's like he slumps back into a chair, that he's so private and so unassuming that you don't see the greatness, you don't see an actor in him. What you would see in Alec Guinness in an interview is a guy who might be a school teacher. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I know. I've seen probably a good modern equivalent. I've seen similar things from Val Kilmer, for example. He'll play all sorts of roles, but then when I've heard him interviewed, he's seems very withdrawn or whatnot. Um, how do you judge a script or the character that you have to play? I've often said and tell young writers that a good character, if you're writing a novel or whatever you're writing, you don't have to describe the color of their eyes, but you want to get the audience behind the eyes. Notice what that character sees. It's more important if your character is walking down the street to, if he's looking at, say, maybe a cat chasing a bird, or he's looking at some man who's doubled over in pain on the opposite side, or what that character notices becomes the thing and defines his character more so than, say, what he's actually wearing. Is that a similar thing that if you get a role, especially if it's a larger role than just 30 seconds or a minute in something, is that a way that you can judge the role? That what is this character noticing, and does that help you with your performance?
It helps enormously. What you would call in a play stage directions, and in a film, as you know, we call it narrative. And the greater attention the writer plays to the narrative, the more information he gives to the actor, the more he tells the actor about what he's thinking and what he's thinking about the character, what he feels about the character, and what the character feels about himself and about his situation. And sometimes a writer can do it in very few words. And an expression that I repeat is something Shakespeare wrote. And he wrote it about a schoolboy. And in very few words, he tells you a world about what this little schoolboy is thinking. And he talks about the schoolboy trudging unwillingly to school. And in those words, trudging unwillingly, you know a world about how that little boy feels about going to school that day.
Yeah. So would you subscribe, because you said that you didn't think there was any difference between stage and film or TV acting. Do you also for example, they call when you send to the Academy Awards or the Emmys or whatnot, I know actors will send in, I guess, what would be the equivalent of demo reels of whatever that performance is, the best bits from whatever.
They do that for the TV Academy.
They don't do that for...
Not the motion picture.
Okay. And I'll follow up with later in the interview about that, because are you a voting member of the Academy, by the way?
I am. I have been since 1978.
Okay, good. I'll talk to you about that later in the interview. But do you think that a lot of times the things that people will send in, say, for the Emmy Awards, they tend to, from what I've always heard, be the gut-wrenching scenes in a hospital room, the character's dying or their relative is dying? Or do you think that the best acting comes in sort of those little in-between moments? Because as I said, I think a great actor elevates things. And when you have something that's sort of a bridging scene between maybe two more ostensibly powerful scenes, to raise that up to the level of the other scenes, to me, seems to be the harder task. Would you agree?
I would say that the best thing I can say about that is something that I have heard, and that is that sometimes actors, for some reason, and I don't know who makes the decision, maybe the studio does, maybe the actor makes the decision, but sometimes, for whatever reason, the scene that the actor would have served himself or herself best by sending in is not the scene that they send in. And I don't know how they judge, and I don't know how the voters think about that. I don't even know how I think about it. And I will tell you that for the Academy Awards, when I vote, especially for Best Picture, the picture I choose very rarely wins. I will say that in 2 instances, I can tell you for sure the picture I voted for won, and those are the 2 instances in which I was in the picture. So I emotionally voted for the picture, and the picture's won. That was Ordinary People. I was in the Academy in '78, and Ordinary People was 1980. I voted for my picture then, and when we did The Artist, I voted for The Artist, and The Artist won. But I've missed out. I remember, I think I would say maybe 1981 or 82, perhaps. I voted for Raiders of the Lost Ark for Best Picture, and Chariots of Fire won. And last year, Spotlight won, and I voted for a picture called Room. So I don't know, and I don't even know how I vote. I have to be moved by the picture. And it's very difficult. It's so subjective. And I know that if I vote one way today, if I see that picture again, or I see the other pictures again, I might vote a different way. I think getting the nomination is a more accurate look at what the best pictures are, what the best performances are. It's hard. It's really hard. I take my responsibility very seriously, by the way, as an Academy voter.
I want to sort of just wrap up the second segment, and the third segment I want to talk about some of your specific roles and go through sort of the IMDb list. But, you know, we've talked about, and I introduced you as a quote-unquote character actor, and usually that means is that the man or the woman isn't the hunky guy, she isn't the character actress, isn't the babe in the bikini. Is there a kind of marginal kind of sort of resentment where, God, just once I'd love to do a love scene. Karen Austin, for example, told me that John Candy, she did a love scene with John Candy, and he was ebullient in his praise because he wanted to do a love scene all his career, and it was the only love scene he ever did in his whole lifetime. But you know, the character actress or the actress never gets the hunk, never gets the babe. You know, you mentioned Sophia Loren. You're not going to get Sophia Loren at the end of the movie. Is there any kind of sort of like, God damn, just once I would like to, you know, get Sophia Loren?
Well, yeah, I think in a fantasy life, I probably think that, but the reality of it is that the only time that will ever happen will be when I finance the film myself. Because every producer knows that if I have the love scenes with Sophia Loren, nobody's going to buy tickets.
Yeah.
I just know that. And I remember my friend M. Emmett Walsh, who I mentioned to you earlier, the great character actor, said that he knows that if he is married to a beautiful, glamorous movie star, he knows that he's going to be dead in the first 10 minutes of the film. And my friend Darryl Swerling, who did Chinatown, very character-looking guy, glasses, thin, kind of a hawk nose, always did character parts. And in Chinatown, he was married to Faye Dunaway. And in the first 10 minutes, his body was found in a drainage ditch.
If you could change something about Hollywood, and well, let me just preface this. I know when I look at the television, especially on network television, I don't have cable, but I see some of the shows like Mad Men on Netflix and whatnot. I know that there's been a dearth of what I would call real drama. Yes, you have cop dramas, and you have the lost fantasy kind of shows, and you have the police procedurals and the hospital melodramas. But there's nothing anymore like the Waltons, or there was a show Family with Christy McNichol and a couple of great actors in the late '70s. Real family dramas. And when I think of film, a few weeks ago I was watching a documentary on John Cassavetes, and he said, you know, I get so fucking sick and tired of entertainment. I want some art. And I know as a critic and just as someone who watches deeper things, like a good three-course meal, something that's a film or even a great episode of Barney Miller is more filling than just the kind of fluff. And I think one of the things is because you have that sort of stratification about character actor, lead actor, the Hollywood hunk kind of thing. Um, would you like to see if you could change it that there would be maybe some realistic drama? Now you're almost 80 now, so you would probably be cast still in a grandfatherly role or something. But I look back at like the Waltons I mentioned, and Will Geer played a grandfather for a number of years there, but he was treated as a real person. It seems you said you haven't experienced ageism, but people are always sort of put into these packages, these stereotypes, these archetypes. Um, if I was a filmmaker, if I could get the backing, and maybe that's probably one of the reasons why not. But I would want to have someone like you or something in a more substantial role, just because it would lend a bit of realism to the role. I would think. Is that something that you wish in your perfect acting world that you could change? That Hollywood be a bit more open minded about casting, whether we're talking race or age or this or that?
I think that the time for me has been in my favor, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And years ago, and I can remember this started probably 10 or 12 years ago, a wonderful casting director named Penny Perry called my manager and asked if I was available for a particular Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. And as it turned out, I was available. We never heard another word about it. A year later, she calls back for another Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. Is Basil available? We said yes. Never heard another word. 6 months or so later, another call. And I said to my manager, Brad Lamack, wonderful manager by the way, I said to Brad, Brad, would you ask Penny how many actors she has asked for availability for that role? And he comes back, he calls me, says, Penny said she asked for availability on 13 actors for that role. And people say to me, so Basil, but then they've asked me, why is your career better now than it was 10 years ago? I said, well, 10 years ago, I was on a list of 13 actors. I said, and now 10 of those actors are dead.
That's good. Well, let's end this segment here, and in the next segment, I want to like I said, sort of scroll through some of your roles and hear some of the anecdotes you may have about certain film and television roles. We'll do that when we return. I have been speaking with Basil Hoffman. He's an actor who's been around for 40 or more years in the film industry and television industry, and spent the first hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes talking about his life, the art of acting, different technical things. But now I want to spend a little time here talking about some of the specific career highs and lows maybe that you may have had. And we've gotten earlier, and I'm looking now on your IMDb page, and I'm sure that there's probably some wrong information and things not up there, but we left off sort of in the early 70s. I think you'd mentioned Lady Liberty, and then you talked a little bit about All the President's Men. I'm just looking at some of the earlier shows you did. You did Kung Fu and Rockford Files and Policewoman with Dickinson, Angie Dickinson, and then the Waltons. You actually did the Waltons. Well, let me just start with some of these shows from the early 70s. Are there any memories you have of some of those shows, positive or negative, the Waltons or Angie Dickinson show?
Well, I will tell you about, because you mentioned working with in Policewoman,
Yeah.
And working on the Rockford Files and working on Kung Fu. The casting director I mentioned to you, Tom Jennings, was the casting director on Kung Fu, and he told me I didn't have a those shows that I did, Policewoman, Rockford Files, Kung Fu, Sanford and Son and MASH, were the 5 TV shows I did before I ever had an agent. And I mentioned Tom Jennings to you because Tom Jennings was the casting director who then became an agent who introduced me to, or reintroduced me to Alan Shane and then Alan Pakula's meeting came from that. But Tom said to me, before he introduced me to the guy who became my manager, he said, Basil, he says, you don't have an agent. He says, I know you don't want an agent. I wanted an agent. No agent wanted me. But he says, I know you don't want an agent, you're the manager. He said, you're going to work a lot in this town. He said, we're going to rip you off. He said, you're going to work a lot. He said, but you'll never do my show. And his show was Kung Fu. And the reason I did his show was because 2 weeks after I met him, he had a part for a telegraph operator. But he knew that I wasn't going to be a sheriff or a cowboy or a villain on a horse. So he thought I would probably never do his show, and as it turned out, I did the show. And I will tell you a funny story about MASH. The first time I did MASH, I met Burt Metcalf, who was the associate producer of the show. And it was just a general interview, and he said, Basil, so how do you see yourself? How are you usually cast? I said, well, Burt, I said, usually I'm cast as characters who aren't very likable. He said, well, I don't see that in you, Basil. He said, I don't see that in you. He said, I wouldn't pigeonhole myself that way. I wouldn't even think that way because there's so many other things you can do. Well, 2 weeks later, Burt calls me to play a character who is a terrible, terrible guy. And then 5 years later, when he calls me back on the show, he calls me to play a guy who's even worse than the first guy. And this is after he tells me that he didn't see in me that I was not likable. And I would say to this day, I am usually playing characters who have some unlikability in them, much more than likability, much more. And I can't explain it. I don't know. I can't investigate it. I don't want to investigate it. I just do what the script tells me to do.
Looking here, I see that you did a miniseries in '76, Arthur Haley's The Money Changers, and just seeing his name, I'm like, God damn, Arthur Haley. I did an interview with Irwin Shaw's son a few months back, and that brings me back to that era of the late '70s when miniseries were all the rage. What was working on a miniseries like? Is that more like a feature film than a regular 1 hour drama?
Well, in this particular case, it was, and yes, it is, and often it has to do with what the producers think of the material. I think that somebody doing a miniseries, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think if you're doing a miniseries, you have more respect for the work than if you're doing a 1 hour show every week. I think it's incumbent upon you in your own mind to elevate the work in some way if you're doing a miniseries. I just believe that. I will say that working with Christopher Plummer was a real joy for me. The only scene I had with him was a telephone conversation. And Chris Plummer came down to the set to do his part of the telephone conversation with me, even though they were not going to shoot his part of the conversation until later. And of course, when they shot his part of the scene, then he had my voice from the part that we had already shot. So he had my part of the conversation. But Chris Plummer came down to the set to work with me.
Now, I see that you did the Spielberg film Close Encounters, but uncredited. Is that what you just hired then as an extra then? When you get an uncredited role, is that just what you are?
No, I'm uncredited because what is left of me in the film apparently is not enough that they wanted to put me in the credits. It annoyed me a little bit. But my character has a name. I took 3 separate trips to Alabama to do that. I worked 12 days on the picture. And in 1976, when we shot Close Encounters, I was paid more money then than I had ever made before that. Steven Spielberg paid me $1,000 a day in 1976 for 12 days on Close Encounters. And one of the scenes was so important that I went back to Alabama, back to Mobile, because Steven wanted to reshoot the scene. He reset it. He said it differently. We reshot it. And that scene is still not in the film. But a friend of mine, one of my neighbors, said to me a few years ago, she said, Basil, do you have a DVD of Close Encounters of the Third Kind? I said, no. She said, well, I have one. Do you want it? I said, no, there's no point because there's not that much of me in the film. She says, yes, there is. She says, because you're in the additional scenes. You're in
the director's edition.
Yeah, the extras. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and that's the scene I had with Richard Dreyfuss.
So,
but the choice of no credit. I took no credit on one film, and maybe I should have. A picture that I thought I should have had billing up front, and I didn't. And I said, well, I won't just take no billing at all. And that was a picture called Down with Love that I did with Renee Zellweger. And as it turns out, that scene is also on my website. It's also on my reel.
Yeah.
And I have some fabulous work in that scene between me and Renee Zellweger. And some of it is hilarious.
So you said that you chose not to take credit. How does that work with SAG? Because I know, for example, a lot of writers, screenwriters, will often argue to get credit. When I did the Rod Serling show, for example, we talked about how I felt that a lot of Planet of the Apes still had that Rod Serling touch in it, and over the years, his role in the initial screenplay was diminished. Why would you want to diminish your role? Is that a union thing that you have the option to say, I don't want to be credited?
It was ego. My ego had run amok. I should have just taken the screen credit and just been done with it. But it was a choice for me, and it was a mistake.
But does that affect any like royalties you might get or anything?
No, not in any way.
No, okay.
Not in any way. For the Writers Guild, the writer doesn't have a lot of choice in many ways, and sometimes does, and I'm not sure how that works. I'm not in the Writers Guild, but I know that when I did Ordinary People, the Electric Horseman, when I did Electric Horseman, the only script I ever saw was a draft by Alvin Sargent. That's the only script, and Alvin Sargent won an Academy Award 2 years later for Ordinary People. But the only script I ever saw for The Electric Horseman was a draft by Alvin Sargent. Alvin Sargent is not credited anywhere on The Electric Horseman. So even though the script that was used was not his script, or was his script, he got no credit for it. And I'm sure that's contractual, that he just was the script doctor and then the rewriter, and that was it.
Well, let me ask, what do you think was your, what do you know even, sorry, in terms of minutes, what was your largest, say, feature film role? Do you calculate that and say, oh, I had 5 minutes in Ordinary People, I had 8.5 here, and then maybe 11 is your top or something? Do you sort of remember those kinds of things?
I don't actually remember those things. I remember, also because it's so recent, Rio, I Love You, because I had the entire film, that entire 8 minutes of that segment that Polo Sorrentino wrote and directed with just me and Emily Mortimer, just the two of us, for about 8 minutes. So that in recent memory, that would be the largest thing that I've done. The most important role I ever did, to me and my career, was All the President's Men.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because of my relationship with Redford, which I mentioned earlier, and now I can get into it a little bit. I told you that I had gotten that note in the mail from Redford. Redford came by my desk one day. I was sitting in the Washington Post set at Warner Brothers. Redford walks by the desk and he says, "Basil, did you get my note?" I said, No, Bob, I didn't. And he walked on. And I had this look on my face, like this, and Alan Pakula walks by and he says, "Basil, what is it?" I said, "Well, Bob just came by and asked if I'd gotten his note." And Alan looks at me and says, "Well, you're not fired." And that night I saw the note. I got a letter from Redford, a handwritten note thanking me for my work in the film for this relatively small role. And later on in the film, Alan comes to me, Pakula comes to me, says, "Basil, we're going to reshoot a scene." And that's the scene where the editors are all standing around the television set, and Eagleton is being dropped from the ticket, from the Republican ticket.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it was, anyway, he's being dropped from the ticket. And he said, we're going to reshoot the scene. He said, you're not going to be in that scene. He said, the reason is because that is only background for the scene. Redford, as Bob Woodward, is talking to Kenneth Dahlberg on the telephone. Redford doesn't like the way it went the first time, and he wants you to play Dahlberg. Redford thinks you're a good actor. He wants you to play Dahlberg. He says, so the bad news is, he says, you're not going to be in the scene. He said, and later on we'll put in an older man's voice. He says, because Dahlberg was much older than you. As it turns out, they tried to replace my voice and couldn't. It never sounded right. So I am in the picture as Dahlberg. So I'm the city editor, this little role of city editor, and I'm also Kenneth Dahlberg. And I say that that's the most important role that I ever had, the most important job I ever had, because it resulted in another picture for Alan Pakula.
Yeah.
It resulted in my doing The Electric Horseman for Sidney Pollack because Redford had asked for me for that film. It resulted in my doing The Money Changers because they had seen me in All the President's Men. I did Close Encounters of the Third Kind because Steven Spielberg had seen me in All the President's Men. And I had done this whole raft of big studio pictures for huge directors. And I was in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences 4 years before I ever got a movie that I had auditioned for. Remarkably. And now I know that that was the hand of God, Dan. I can trace so many instances in my life, in my professional career, that just could not be accidents. Could not be accidents.
Now, let me just ask you, since you did then, because you said your voice is still on the film speaking to Redford, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So do you get then paid double for that because you're playing two characters, even if you're not seen on screen?
You know, maybe I should have, but I didn't. I mean, I don't know if I... And I also did another voice on the telephone. I also played Robert Bennett, an attorney, on the phone. And it's a little shorter sequence. Redford wanted me to do both of those voices, so I did them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to ask about on sets, because a lot of times, especially in television, you read a lot of things from actors years later where they say that some of the sets, are sort of hostile, and people who are coming on to do their, episode, sometimes it's not a welcoming atmosphere. Other ones are. I know, for example, just to give two examples, and it's because I did speak with Karen Austin. She had worked with Reinhold Weege, who was the producer then. He also worked on Barney Miller. And from what I've heard, and what I also heard or could read between the lines, is that the Barney Miller set, from what I've heard from some of these other interviews on the Emmy.org or whatever thing, is that people loved working on the Barney Miller set, but the Night Court set was not particularly thought of to be the best working environment. And you don't have to name any names or anything, but is that sort of something that you've noticed when you've done this show or that show, and it's great to work, and you might get a role that, like if you go back on MASH twice there, if the first time it was a bad experience, would you turn down a job or say, okay, I need the money, so I'm going to do it and grit my teeth for 6 days?
Well, I've been so blessed, Dan, and people think I must be making this up, but the fact is, I have had no unpleasant experiences.
No.
Not a single one that I can remember. I will say I do have a comment to make about, and I did Night Court, as I think you know,
yeah.
And I also did Barney Miller. And when we did Barney Miller, and all the regulars on the show told us how the show was going to work, and we did the show without an audience, and we would shoot it over and over and over again, scene by scene, blocking, shooting, well into the night, every night. And every night, have you met Reinhold Weege, by the way?
No.
No. Well, Reinhold would come down, and it could be 12 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. He would come down, and the stuff was always wonderful and funny, and he just looked terrible. He looked like he had never slept in his life. He just looked awful, but he wrote this funny stuff. But it was just pleasant. It was very pleasant. It was all pleasant. I was actually fired from Barney Miller the first time And I will tell you a very quick story. I was hired to do Barney Miller, and we had a table read where all the actors are sitting, and we read through the script, and Danny Arnold goes up to his office. And the stage manager comes up to me, and he says, Basil, he says, Danny wants to see you in his office. I said, okay, and I started to, and he says to me, and you can take your stuff. I didn't want to take my stuff. I'm coming back. He said, and you can take your stuff. So I went up to Danny's office, and he said, Basil, he says, well, I got some news for you. He says, there's good news and bad news. He says, the bad news is we have to cut you out of this episode. He says, it's just too long. He says, the good news is, he says, we're going to have you back because we want to do that character. He says, and another piece of good news is we also have to pay you for this show. So I got paid twice for it. But that one moment when the stage manager says to me, you can take your stuff, it's like my heart dropped out of my body.
Was that the only time you were fired from a set?
Yeah. It's the only time I was ever replaced.
Now, I see that you did a handful of episodes on Santa Barbara, which was a soap opera in the 80s. So that wasn't a long-term role. I guess it looks like you were playing someone named Joshua Friendly. Was that maybe just a minor role? What's it like going on to a soap opera? And back then, is there a different pace on the set of a soap opera?
Well, there is a different pace because they're going to get through it. They're going to shoot the show in a day. They're going to shoot an entire show in a day. And that same length drama, an hour drama, at night, a nighttime drama would be 7 days of shooting. 6 or 7 days of shooting. And they do it in a soap opera in a day. Every day they have to complete an episode. And it's different. I don't know how the regulars do it. I also had I had a recurring role on One Life to Live in New York, which, by the way, led to a fabulous TV movie in Hollywood. Because I was reading the Hollywood Reporter one day, I was in Hollywood, and I see that Doris Quinlan has become a producer at a studio called Marble Arch. And Doris Quinlan had produced One Life to Live, so I called her, wanted to see if she would come see me in a play. She would not, but she wanted me to come see her in the office. I left some film with her, and I got to work in a TV movie directed by Guy Green, who had become a terrific director after having been an Academy Award-winning cinematographer. Guy Green directed and won an Academy Award for Best Cinematography in Great Expectations, and that was one of the last films for which they gave 2 Cinematography Academy Awards, one for black and white and one for color.
Now, just looking at some of the shows, I see a show, some of these names bring me back. It's a Living. Was that the Ann Gillian show?
Which show?
It's a Living. Ann Gillian? Was that, I think
Yes, I think so. Got it so far in the back.
Yeah.
It's a comedy.
Yeah. And then I saw you did Sledgehammer. I remember that was only on for, I think, a year. That was one of a really outrageous cop show. When you do a show...
It was hilarious. It was fun to work on, by the way.
Yeah, David Rasche. He was really good.
Yeah,
when you do a show like that, that's so over the top, or like if you did like Airport. Did you do Airport?
I did not.
No, okay. Well, when you're doing that kind of over-the-top stuff, is that in a sense more fun? Is it a more relaxed atmosphere? Or is it in a sense maybe harder because you have to be so loosey-goosey?
Well, the wonderful thing about it is that when I do a show like that, I get to be deadly serious, and it is so silly that it's hilarious to the audience, and it's funny because the characters take it so seriously. And I played a character who was an accountant for the mob, and the Godfather sends me out on a hit. He sends me out to kill Sledgehammer. And I say to him, Godfather, I don't know. What do I know about killing? I can't. Why are you sending me? He says, you're an accountant. You kill people every day. It was fun to do.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. They're all fun for me. They're just all fun for. I've been. Listen, Dan, I've gotten to do a lot of wonderful stuff, and people have treated me well. They've taken good care of me.
Well, I'm seeing you did the Milagro Beanfield War, and the listing is just in the governor's office. So that's, I guess, just one of those things. A guy who's just standing around, do you not get any? Does that when you
No,
don't have
I
a
played,
name?
and
I'm sorry. When you
I
don't,
never understood.
I'm sorry. When you don't have a name, does that mean that the character doesn't speak?
Well, the character did have a name,
Oh, okay.
and the character did speak, and I could never understand why that's the billing, and maybe that's the billing on the film as well. But I never understood the billing, and I know that sometimes I get surprised in the billing. When I did Hail Caesar, the character's name was Stu Schwartz, and on my contract it says Stu Schwartz. It's all Stu Schwartz. And now I see that on IMDb, and I guess on the final film now, it says Stu Schwartz Accounting. And I think it's because, I can only guess this, that Ethan Coen and Joel Coen wanted to be sure that the audience knew who I was. So I think they did that as a gift to me.
Mm.
That they would say not only the name of my character, but where my scene was in the film, which was very thoughtful of them, I think.
And that brings, let me just talk about then when you sign a contract to do a role. Do you sign a contract and then you know the part and they name the character part? Do they tell you that they estimate you're going to be working, say, 15 days on this film? I mean, how much detail about the role and what how specific does because I would think the union has something to do with that. Does it lay out like 15 or 25 points of he shall be paid this on this day, overtime after this amount of days or something?
Absolutely, everything. A script, a contract for a movie, for a starring role in a movie. It could be many, many pages, and I know my contract for Rio I Love You was about this thick. So it's all very, very specific. And when you start a film, when they give you a start date, they give you usually on or before the contract, unless it's a day player and they have to pay you for the day they want you. But if it's a role that's going to be over a period of time, the start date is on or before, which means they can start shooting you the day before the date, they can shoot you on that date, or they can shoot you the day after. But if they shoot you 3 days after, they have to pay you for those other 2 days because they have specified when they're going to start the shoot. And then there's a reason for that, because actors have other commitments, and hopefully actors have other commitments.
And what have you ever been called, like you said with the Spielberg thing, it didn't make the final film. But if you're called back 3 months later to reshoot a film, is that considered, do you get a separate contract for a callback like that? Or?
No, they just expect you to show up. And I know when I did The Electric Horseman, when we finished the film and left and finished shooting, pretty much, the script hadn't been completed. And months later, and so my memory is 3 or 4 months later, they called some of us back. They called Redford back, Jane Fonda, John Saxon, Nicholas Coster, Jim Sicking, and they called me back. And they always, I guess they just always expected those actors are all going to be available when they need them. And it usually works out that way.
So if let's say John Saxon or you had not been available because you had a contractual commitment elsewhere, do the producers from one picture then have to sort of go to arbitration with your next commitment?
Sometimes the two producers can work it out, and they will try to do that. And I remember, and I actually think it was when I was doing It's a Living, that I think that I was also doing an episode of Hill Street Blues. And on the Hill Street Blues, they worked it out because I was supposed to start shooting It's a Living, and Hill Street Blues was going to go over a day or two. So what they had to do is give the entire company, or a number of the actors who were involved, what they call a forced call, and pay extra overtime because they couldn't rest enough from the day before for Hill Street Blues, just to get rid of me that next day so that I could go that afternoon to It's a Living. I'm pretty sure it was It's a Living that I had to go to from Hill Street Blues. And they do try to work it out. Sometimes, I guess, if they can't, maybe they have to alter a script. And if it's a star of the film, then they just have to eat it, I guess, for a few days and make it work out somehow.
And would you then, because I guess with the callback, you're still paid at the same rate. You wouldn't get. Do you get overtime for a callback? Or?
Well, I would get the extra. I would get paid for the extra day, but I would also get paid by union requirements. They have to pay you extra if you haven't had the required rest period, which I think is 12 hours from one shoot to the next. So if they have to shoot you 8 hours later on a new day, then there's a penalty for those 4 hours that you weren't. They didn't give you your rest time.
Another film that I see on your list is Communion, and that's the Whitley Strieber one about supposedly being abducted by aliens. It says you played a Dr. Friedman there. Was that the psychiatrist that?
No, the psychiatrist was another role, and that was played by a female actress. But I was the doctor who examined Whitley Strieber, or Christopher Walken, in the film. And I had several scenes of examinations of him and conferences with him.
Now, when you
Terrific guy to work with, by the way, Christopher. I did 2 pictures with him. I also did the Milagro Beanfield War with him.
Oh, that's right. He was in that. I was thinking maybe you'd done The King of New York or something. But and let's see. Just going on a little bit more. I see that you did something with Elvira, the horror show host. It says TV series. Was this? What does that mean? That you were one of her ghouls introducing a horror show or something?
No. It was episodic, actually. So there was her and an imagined family that Elvira had. So it was like a regular sitcom. It wasn't a variety show of any kind. And I played a doctor, a psychiatrist, or something on the show. I don't recall. She's funny, though, by the way.
Yeah.
She's funny and sweet, lovely person.
Then I see you did like The Practice and The West Wing. One of the other actors I spoke to said that they noticed that in their career they go through sort of periods where they get a run of, say, playing lawyers, or they get a run playing computer nerds or something. Have you noticed that you've done over the course of maybe a couple of years that you get 5 or 6 out of 7 or 8 roles where you're playing the same type of character?
I never thought about it, Dan.
No?
It never occurred to me. I did a lawyer in the picture The Electric Horseman. I did a lawyer on. I did 5 episodes of Hill Street Blues, playing a lawyer. I did a lawyer on The Practice. I had an interesting experience on The Practice, which I'll tell you very quickly, and I'm not going to mention any names. But I worked with 2 of the stars of the show, The Practice. And one of the actors was just terrific to work with. One of the stars of the show. And the other actor was fine to work with, but he seemed to have an attitude of some kind. And my manager asked me how it was to work with those 2 actors. And I mentioned the one actor who I just had a joyful experience working with. And he said, and what do you think of, what about the other actor? I said, TV star. And that was all I said.
A swollen head kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of. I didn't say that, but I said TV star. And you see, you knew what I meant.
Yeah.
You knew what I meant.
Well, let me just ask, because you talk about some of the latest ones here. Let me just ask, if you look back, who are some of the best actors that you worked with? You talked about generous actors. And I know actors sometimes use that term, that there are great actors who may personally be an asshole, but that on screen they sparkle. But then there are generous actors where they'll allow the supporting actor to get, you know, their bona fides on the screen. Who are some of the, say, that you would say some of the best actors and those that have been the most generous to you in some of your roles?
Well, I would say that the way you put it, I would say Jason Robards, who I got to work in 2 films with. I mean, actually work with. I
Yeah.
worked with Robards in All the President's Men, and I worked with him in Comes a Horseman. And Jason Robards would do everything he could to make the other actor better. He was just anything he could do to make the other actor comfortable, to make the scene work for the other actor. I think Jane Fonda did that, and Jane Fonda. I remember after we shot one particular scene, Jane was walking off the set and she patted me on the back. She said, "You really get into this, don't you?" She said, "Are you a method actor?" And then she walked, and it was very sweet, you know, just a lovely thing that she said. And Peter Falk rescued me in a way from the director, and just a way briefly, because the director had said to me, Peter and I had a couple of scenes together, but the one scene, we started the scene in a doorway, and I am much taller than Peter, and they were using a boom mic, and they were favoring Peter with it, so my voice couldn't be heard as well as Peter's voice. And the director, Sam Wanamaker, said, "Basil," he said, "could you speak up? We need to hear you better." And Peter said, "Sam," he says, "let me talk to Basil." He says, "Let me talk to Basil for a minute." And Peter walks me over to the side. He says, "Basil," he says, "you're doing great." He says, "What you're doing is just great." He says, "I'll tell you what, you keep doing what you do, and we'll make them do what they do." And I remember one day, late in the evening on Columbo, the assistant director came to me. We were taking a dinner break, and the assistant director came to me and said, "Basil, you know, this one shot that we have of you, it's your close-up, and Peter is off stage. Peter wants to know if you want him to stay, because that would be the only thing he would have to stay for after dinner. Do you want him to stay and give you that off-camera line?" And I said, "No, send him home." But Peter Falk would have stayed through the dinner break for me, just to give me an off-camera line as a cue. So I've been, and it's always remarkable to me and memorable to me. When I did At Long Last Love, I had the smallest part in the film, an unknown actor in Hollywood. It was my first movie in Hollywood. And Burt Reynolds came onto the set, and he comes up to me and he sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Burt Reynolds." Introducing himself to me, this nothing little actor on the set. And I'll never forget that. That's class.
Yeah.
And I try to be like that to other actors as well. It's been it's been interesting to see how certain people behave.
I had a friend who was an actor. I never met him personally. His name was George Dickerson. He had a recurring role on the first season of Hill Street Blues, and he did a couple of films with David Lynch, and he did a couple of other roles, and he acted. And in fact, I see that you you went to teach acting in Lebanon. He had actually worked as a diplomat in the 1970s during the Lebanese War. And I remember he died about a year and a half ago, and for about a dozen years we had corresponded, and I'd spoken with him on the phone a lot, and we talked a lot about a number of things. And he always told me that he knew a lot of people in the New York publishing industry because he had been an editor at a sort of what was it called, Cavalier, which was sort of a Playboy knockoff in the early '60s, and then he became an actor in the '80s after he came back from Lebanon as a diplomat. And he knew a lot of people in the industry, and he always told me, I kept telling him, "You got to write a memoir." And he's got actually he did a screenplay of his time in Lebanon that his people trying to get produced. But I said, he knew so many actors, so many writers. I mean, he knew Charlie Chaplin's daughter and her family. He knew Roscoe Lee Brown. He knew he was once best friends with name slips me. Cohen, Leonard Cohen, the singer and writer. And I said, you've got to write a memoir. Um, do you have a sort of circle of, say, actor friends in Hollywood or New York on the stage or on the in film world that you were close to? And have you ever thought about maybe writing a memoir? Because George told me he didn't want to intrude on people's private lives. I said, you don't have to talk about what their favorite sexual position was. Just talk about who they were and whatnot. Because and now that he's dead, no one's ever going to get those stories, these little anecdotes, for example, that you shared. Do you have a circle of friends like that? And have you ever thought about writing about your acting experiences as an actor rather than a teacher, as you've done?
Well, the funny thing is that my book, Acting and How to Be Good at It, is full of those stories and anecdotes about my career. And that's probably as close to a memoir as I will get, although maybe at some point I will write one, but I consider Acting and How to Be Good at It as not only an acting book, but the story of an actor's career. It's really a story of my career as well.
And do you have a sort of a circle of do you friends like and are they mostly character actors, mostly stage actors, mostly commercial actors?
Most of my friends are writers.
Okay.
I don't know why that is. I really don't, but I think I gravitate to writers. And I also do whatever I can to mentor young actors, beginning actors, because I didn't have that advantage when I started in the business. I didn't know a Basil Hoffman, and now I can give other actors a Basil Hoffman. They get to interact with somebody who's actually made a living in this business and had a career, and it's something that I wasn't privileged to have when I started in the business.
Now, one of the things that George had told me, he also voted for the Academy Awards, and I think he became a voter in the mid to late '80s. You said you'd done it since '78, and I know in the last few years he was crippled and he was basically almost homebound. But he told me that he'll in the last 10, 12 years they started sending out, I guess, the trailers for all the movies and whatnot. Number one, do you vote for both the Emmy and the Oscar awards? And is there a time that you put aside to do that? And do you get 100 films, or is it just the ones that are nominated that you end up voting for?
Well, I haven't voted in the Television Academy for several years because I don't have the time to view all of that stuff. And I should take it more seriously. Well, I do take it seriously because I won't vote if I haven't seen enough stuff. For the Academy Awards, I will only vote on films that I've seen, and I won't vote in a category if I haven't seen all the films that are nominated in that category, because I don't think it's fair. The actors get more votes than any other branch, because the actors get to vote on Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Picture. And
so you only vote on the acting. You can't vote on cinematography or direction?
Not to nominate.
Oh, okay.
For the final vote, everybody votes on everything.
Oh, okay.
But to nominate, you only vote your branch and Best Picture.
And
everybody gets to vote Best Picture, but the directors only get one vote. They get the Best Director and Best Picture. And the editors get Best Editing and Best Picture, and the actors get 4 acting nominees and Best Picture.
And I think that in professional sports that if you have 2 guys who are playing and they have nominated for the most valuable player of the NFL or the Major League Baseball leagues, I'm not sure if they can vote for themselves. Can you vote for a work that you've been in?
Oh, sure.
You can?
Absolutely, yeah.
And with the voting, you said that you'd only twice voted for the winning film or whatnot. What are there some kind of Byzantine kind of rules when it comes to the Academy? Are there things that you think should change? I mean, what are the pros and cons of the system as it's set up? Because I look on your website and you were once involved in SAG, and does the union is separate from the Academy? I know they have the SAG awards for stuff. As an actor, do you if you were, say, nominated for a supporting role for something, would it mean more for you that you were voted by your peers in SAG or the Academy? I mean, obviously, money-wise, it might mean more for you for the Academy, but is there a certain kind of more pride for an award from SAG?
Uh, it would be nice to get an award from SAG. That would be fine. Any award is good in my mind, but the Academy Award is really the gold standard, and part of it is because when you're voted for an Academy Award, there are only 5,000 voting members in the Academy, and they are mostly somewhat distinguished people in the industry. They're people who've succeeded on a high level. There are about for instance, there are 1,000 actors, or 1,200, 1,300 in the Motion Picture Academy, but there are 130,000 actors in Screen Actors Guild, which means that if you go into a room with 100 actors, chances are, the odds are that only one actor in that room will be in the Academy.
Mm.
So it's a much greater distinction to get an Academy Award than to get a SAG Award. But I don't want to diminish the SAG Award because they're all important. Or to me, they're all important.
Let me just ask you, because on your website you've mentioned that you have a demo reel, and I've seen this on a lot of the actor websites, and I've had better luck getting actors who have their own websites rather than trying to contact them through agents or look up the agents. I have in the past tried to call the SAG number to get some actors. Do you have to get permission, for example, for your demo reel, or when is it in your contract that, for example, you do this thing that you have the right to take a 30-second clip from your performance?
I think that contractually, I think an actor is entitled to use things for personal purposes. What I can't do is take a film clip and sell it. I can't do that. But to have somebody view my work for my own benefit, I can do that. I did a film in which I was cut out, a picture called Pontiac Moon, and I had a fabulous couple of scenes with Mary Steenburgen and the director, Peter Medak, for whom I've worked 5 or 6 times. Peter gave me those scenes. He said, the only reason your part was cut, he says, was for time. He said, but you should have these scenes. So he gave me the scenes, and they're one of my favorite scenes on my reel. And I also have the individual scenes on the website as well. So not just the reel itself, but I also have extended versions of those scenes, more material.
Now, you mentioned that a neighbor of yours had the director's edition of Close Encounters. How many times have you found that a role had been cut, and then you find out maybe 20 years later when the DVD comes out that the director's edition or the special edition or the Peaches and Cream edition has your role back in? Do you then get more royalties then because it's been put back in, or how does that affect?
Because I got royalties the first time, so I'm getting paid for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for instance. I'm getting the same residuals for TV use of that film as I would get if my scene was not in the added scenes or in the special features, but was in the film itself. So it's all the same. I'm paid the same for Down with Love. It doesn't change. If you're completely cut from a film, if you are completely cut, I believe that maybe they don't have to pay you residuals, although I do get residuals for Pontiac Moon, but I'm not sure. I guess I don't know really what the rules are. My manager handles a lot of that stuff for me, so I don't get too involved in it.
And is that for like screenings? Like, for example, if they screened a film you did in 1982 at some film festival because they're having a director's film festival and that director you work with is getting honored or something, do you get residuals for a special thing like that? And how about like DVDs kind of thing? Do you get?
Yeah, the DVDs I get paid for.
Okay.
If they show
every 100,000 DVDs they sell, you might get $50 or something like that,
or 37 cents, whatever it would be. Yeah, exactly. Paid for the number of DVDs. Sometimes a contract will say has grossed a particular amount in theaters, that the actor's salary gets bumped up. It just depends. A lot of things could be negotiated, Dan.
Yeah.
Almost everything can be negotiated. What you can't negotiate is less than minimum, less than what the Screen Actors Guild contract demands. But that's not why we have agents and managers, especially managers. We have managers to get more.
Now, we talked about your books. I just want to sort of, as we get towards the end of the interview here, I want to talk about you because you list yourself as also having taught acting. When I spoke with Karen Austin, she told me that she had been asked by the Screen Actors Guild to teach some stuff. I guess she was on the local LA chapter or whatnot, and she didn't have even a syllabus whatnot, so she said she had to write one up. Have you taught for the Screen Actors Guild? Have you taught at UCLA or USC? Where have you taught?
I've taught at USC. I've taught at Emerson College, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Confederation College in Canada. I've taught at 4 different universities in Beirut. I taught at Lebanese University. I taught at St. Joseph University. I taught at Académie Libanaise des Beaux-Arts. I taught at Notre Dame University. So I taught at 4 universities. And that was, I was the cultural envoy to Lebanon in 2008. And the State Department sent me to Lebanon to teach acting and directing. When I was there in 2002, I was just there for 1 university. Do you want to see my 2 books?
What?
Do you want to see my 2 books? I can show you my 2 books.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It'll take me about 2 seconds here.
Hold them up high towards your face, at your face level there. Okay, cold reading. Yeah, a little bit higher. A little bit higher, but yeah, okay. That was the first one. Okay.
Cold reading, how to be good at it.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's the acting book.
Hold it up a little higher, please. There you go. Okay.
Acting and how to be good at it.
Now, with the teaching, is that at all levels, or when you were in Lebanon, for example, were you working at the college with enrollees, or were you, say, at a theater too, working with people who wanted to get into acting in Lebanon?
No, I was teaching students.
Yeah.
I was teaching students at the universities, and it's pretty remarkable that all of these students in Lebanon, first of all, their first language is Arabic. Most of them also speak French. If they're Armenian, they also speak Armenian, and they have varying degrees of proficiency in English. Most of them speak English pretty well.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that. Have you found that? What, did you have a translator working with you then when you were in Lebanon?
Nope.
No.
I did the whole thing in English, and we didn't have a problem.
Well, let me just ask you then, because you've spoken about your career at length and some of your belief systems. How do you personally define success? I mean, do you define it in that you've been able to make a career living? Do you define success on say the 4, 5, 6 roles that are the most important or that you think you did the best at? What is your definition of success as an actor?
Longevity.
Longevity?
Yeah. The longer I stay at this, the better the roles get, the better the money gets, well, in some cases. And I think the success, and I think people have to view it that way, that the career should grow. The career should not diminish. It shouldn't get to be less and less when an actor gets older. And actors have to pursue the business as a business. They have to know that it's a business. This is something they have to monetize. They have to make a living at it. And actors spend a lot of time trying to get agents and trying to get managers. And agents and managers don't hire actors. Casting directors can hire actors. Producers, directors hire actors. And these are the people that actors have to ultimately meet. They have to meet the people who can hire them.
Let me just ask you, and this is sort of a more metaphysical question, because you've spoken that you became, well, you are a Christian Scientist. I don't know if that would qualify as born again, but what do you think that your purpose then, both as a person and an actor, has been? Do you say to yourself, well, 50 years from now, long after I'm gone, someone is going to pop in a DVD or download or whatever technology is, and they're going to watch All the President's Men, or they're going to watch one of the sitcoms, and they'll have a moment where they laugh, or they're touched, or they're moved at the end of the film. What is that thing that you think, the purpose that Basil Hoffman's life and acting has served?
Well, first, I'll jump into this very quickly. You asked about being a Christian Scientist. I'm not a Christian Scientist. I've been baptized.
Oh, okay.
So I am now what you would call technically a Messianic Jew.
Okay.
So I'm a Jew who believes in Jesus, and you understand that.
Yeah.
Regarding my purpose, I do know what my purpose is on earth, and I really believe that I'm on earth to give God the one thing that God can only get from me and can't get from any other person, and that's my gratitude. God can't get Basil Hoffman's gratitude from anybody else, and I think that's why I'm here.
But is there anything within that? Is there any sort of earth-directed or any person-to-person directed, as I said, or is that something that's just personal to you, that you feel a satisfaction that someone in 50 or 60 years?
It's personal to me. A very good friend of mine said to me, he said, "You know, Basil, you're never going to die." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because you're in every movie I like." He said, "And people are going to watch those movies forever." And I remember somebody asked Woody Allen if he thought he could achieve immortality.
Yeah.
You've heard this. You've heard this, right?
Yeah.
People asked Woody Allen if he thought he could achieve immortality through his films. He's done 47 films. And he said, "No," he said, "I want to achieve immortality by not dying."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's end this segment on that note. In the final segment, I just want to give you a few minutes to sort of wrap up any thoughts you have on acting. We'll do that in a moment. I have been speaking with Basil Hoffman for the last about 2.5+ hours. We've talked about his career. We've talked about his thoughts on acting, some of the books he's written, some of the people he's known, some of the anecdotes that he's shared. And I just want to wrap up by giving him a few minutes to talk about his outlook on acting, his life, sum up some of his ideas. So Basil, if you just want to take 3 or 4 minutes to just wrap things up.
Well, what I will say first of all, it's a wonderful industry to be part of, and I love the business. And I tell young actors that you get into this business. Nobody made you do this. There's not an actor in the business who can say, "My parents made me do this. I wanted to be a doctor." That just doesn't exist. And actors become actors because they find some joy in this work. And they should never lose that. And actors should never get to the point where they think it's so hard and nobody wants me and I can't get work. And they get to feeling that the industry is their enemy. And it's not. The industry is their friend. And it's important to build relationships and talk to people and get to know people and offer yourself, be as helpful as you can. And I explain to young actors, and I said this to a young actor who was sent to me a few days ago, and I said, when you get out of college or out of acting school, and you get into this industry, when you contact a casting director, you tell that casting director, not only do I need to meet you, but you need to meet me. And the casting director would say, "Well, why would that be?" And the young actor, who I believe is more castable than, more employable than he will ever be, that actor would say to the casting director, "Because I'm new in the business, I'm a really good actor, I've studied and done the work, I'm a fresh face, I'll do small parts, and I'll work cheap. I'm a casting director's dream." And it's the truth. It's the absolute truth. And actors should think of themselves not as somebody who's begging for work, but as somebody who has a great commodity to offer and something to really offer the business, so that you're not going into the business expecting to be given something, but you're going into the business expecting to give. And people will appreciate that. And I believe that every actor who gets into this business should know, and anybody who gets into this business at the beginning should know, that there are lots of people in this business who will help them. and you have to ask for it, and you have to be willing to say, I'll do anything. I just want to be in this business and I want to succeed. And if you can help me, I'd appreciate it. And so many people will step up to do that. People will be surprised.
Well, I want to thank Basil Hoffman for his time. I will link to his website, basilhoffman.com, as well as his IMDb page and also probably his Wikipedia page. You can find it below, and if you've enjoyed the interview, you could contact him, especially, I guess, if you're a casting director or something that watches this. But again, I want to thank you for your time, Basil. It's very enlightening, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it so much.